Folks, we're going to get started. If you could grab your seat. If you're with the previous group, please exit. Okay, Baltimore City Council Ways and Means Committee, we're back in session. Council Bill 23-0381, Ordinance of Estimates for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2024. I'm Mayor Costello, Councilman from the 11th District, Chair of the committee. Joined to my left by Council President Nick Mosby, Councilman Chris Burnett, 8th District, member of the committee, Councilman Zeke Cohen, 1st District. To my right, Councilwoman Felicia Porter, 10th District, Councilman Isaac Yitzi Schleifer, 5th District, member of the committee, Councilman Mark Conway, 4th District. We have representatives from the Mayor's Office and Council President's Office. We are going to jump right in. We are here for the Chief Administrative Officer portion of the hearing. This is set to go from 2 to 5:30 p.m. We do have Matt Garbark, I think. I saw him earlier. Matt's always somewhere. Matt Garbark here from the Mayor's Office of Infrastructure Development, correct? So we allocated the last hour for infrastructure related questions, so I'm going to ask that we please try to push those towards the end. I know we have a number of questions for the CAO. CAO Leach, turn it over to you.
All right, thank you so much. Good afternoon, Chairperson Costello, members of the Ways and Means Committee, and council staff. For the record, I am Faith P. Leach, Chief Administrative Officer for the City of Baltimore. I am honored to appear before you today to provide remarks on the fiscal year 2024 budget on behalf of the Office of the Mayor. I want to start my remarks, as I often do, with a thank you to the public servants that work for, yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. 2 quick housekeeping items for folks that are testifying. Got this new technology here. Make sure you press the little button on the right. That'll make your microphone go red like it is. When you're done speaking, for city agencies, I just want to be clear moving forward that comments are addressed directly to the council, not the public, citizens of Baltimore, the news, the media. It's conversation between the council and the city agencies and vice versa. So thank you. I apologize for interrupting, Ms. Leach.
No worries. I want to start my remarks, as I often do, with a thank you to the public servants that work for the City of Baltimore. It is the honor of my lifetime to serve as Baltimore's Chief Administrative Officer and to lead and, when necessary, advocate for the men and women of Baltimore City government. Chairman Costello, our employees, like you, love this city with a passion. Employees like Kendall Abu-Akim, the head of DOT maintenance, and the city's Richard Ladinsky Employee of the Year award winner, and Mr. Emmanuel Clark, a 55-year employee of DPW. These employees inspire me to be a better public servant and leader. They motivate me during the hard times, and no matter the challenge, they keep our city going. So to every single employee of Baltimore City government, from my immediate CAO team, Simone, Alan, Ari, Summer, Ali, Kim, and Karan, to the budget staff like Laura Larson and Mara James, and to every cabinet member that works around the clock for this city, thank you. You are valued, your work has meaning, and you are the best of Baltimore. Council members, as we convene over the next week to discuss the budget, I want us to be reminded of our shared goal, our purpose, as leaders of this city. And that is to build a city government that the citizens of Baltimore can believe in. And that starts with our fiduciary responsibility to develop and approve a city budget. More than numbers on a page, budgets are value statements. Our city's budget represents who we are and how we plan to show up for our city. Our budget is a roadmap for the future. That is why I can sit before you today proud of the fiscal year 2024 budget. This budget represents our Baltimore values and makes significant investments in our youth, older adults, and core city services. The Scott administration is proud to present a local budget of $4.36 billion. This historic budget was developed against the backdrop of increasing expenditures, rising inflationary costs, labor shortages, and continued supply chain demands that impact the delivery of city services. In spite of these challenges, the fiscal year 2024 budget includes the largest ever investment in Baltimore City Public Schools and Baltimore's young people. It establishes a new Office on Aging to support older adults and continues Baltimore's pandemic recovery efforts by increasing investments in core city services upended by the pandemic. My remarks today will provide an overview of the CAO office structure and later highlight a few of my office's early successes. I will also discuss key investments in the fiscal year 24 budget, and finally outline how, post-budget, the Scott administration will manage agency performance and transform agency service delivery. The voters of the City of Baltimore overwhelmingly ratified a charter amendment to establish the Chief Administrative Officer role in Baltimore city government to provide additional management capacity and support for city government. It is my job to manage the day-to-day operations of government, leveraging performance management systems and tools to track and improve agency performance, lead end-to-end reforms of city government systems, and to serve as an advisor to the mayor on the execution of fiscal and policy-related matters impacting our city. By instituting this best-in-government management approach, Baltimore joins the ranks of cities across the U.S. with a professional manager, including, but not limited to, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Chicago, Charlotte, San Diego, Phoenix, Washington, D.C., and more. Moreover, more than 80% of the top 25 largest cities in America have a city administrator, a city manager, or a chief administrative officer. And in Maryland, every jurisdiction except 3 has a professional administrator leading the day-to-day operations of government. The mayor continues to serve as the city's chief executive officer while the CAO manages government operations. To this end, the CAO's office is comprised of a deputy CAO and 3 deputy mayors, the deputy mayor for public safety, deputy mayor for equity, health, and human services, and a deputy mayor for community and economic development. Each of these executives is responsible for the management and oversight of a cluster of agencies and quasi-governmental partners. The Deputy CAO supports many of the city's operational business units, including the Department of Transportation, Department of Public Works, the Department of General Services, the Department of Human Resources, and BSIT, to name a few. The Deputy Mayor for Public Safety supports the Baltimore Police Department, Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, the Baltimore Fire Department, and more. While the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development supports the Baltimore City Department of Housing and Community Development, Department of Planning, Mayor's Office of Employment Development, BDC, and Visit Baltimore, to name a few. Finally, the Deputy Mayor for Equity, Health, and Human Services provides management and oversight to the Baltimore City Department of Health and the Baltimore City Department of Health, Department of Parks and Recreation, Mayor's Office of Homeless Services, and the Mayor's Office of Children and Family Success. Additionally, the Office of Recovery Programs, the Infrastructure Development Office, Law Department, and the Department of Finance report directly to the Chief Administrative Officer. The deputy mayors, as you can see by our organizational chart, are supported by an assistant deputy mayor, and the deputy CAO is supported by 2 assistant city administrators who provide project management support to clusters of agencies. Developing a strategic action plan is a best practice in local government management and is essential to aligning human and financial resources around a city's priorities. As such, the CAO led the enterprise in the development of the Mayor's Action Plan, which continues to serve as the administration's strategic roadmap. Through the Mayor's Action Plan, we set ambitious yet achievable goals for our city, aligned to a set of actions, metrics, and timelines. The FY2024 budget advances Mayor Scott's action plan, and in alignment with the plan, we have organized the budget by the action plan pillars: As a reminder, the action plan pillars are prioritizing youth, building public safety, clean and healthy communities, equitable neighborhood development, and responsible stewardship of city resources. I will now walk through key FY 2024 budget investments by the mayor's action plan pillars. The first pillar is prioritizing our youth. The fiscal year 2024 budget includes a historic investment in our city's young people, anchored by a $392 million investment for the city's local share for the Baltimore City's public school system. In FY 2024, the city's local share for schools increased by $79 million. Combined with prior year investments, our local share to schools has increased by $120 million in 2 years. Chairman, I am proud that while still faced with the lingering fiscal impact of the pandemic, this administration has submitted a budget that deeply invests in our young people and meets the ambitious financial obligations outlined in the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. I want to thank the state delegation for their partnership and Chairwoman Smith for identifying $10 million to help the city meet the increase in our Kerwin obligation in fiscal year 2024. Additionally, the fiscal year 2024 budget provides $49 million in general fund support to BCRP, including funding for the reopening of the Carroll Park Rec and funding for renovations at North Hartford Park, Clifton Park, and Cloverdale Park. The funding in the fiscal year 24 budget is complemented by $41 million in ARPA funds that will fund the replacement and/or renovation of 20 playgrounds, 7 basketball courts, 2 trails, 3 recreation centers, and 3 pools. The administration made the strategic decision to fund pay increases for recreation staff positions to align with industry standards and to support regional competitiveness. These pay increases will help in our efforts to recruit and retain talent and maintain high-quality recreation programming at our schools. Finally, the fiscal year 2024 budget funds renovations at the Northern Community Action Partnership Center for the Mayor's Office of Children and Family Success, which connects families with resources to move them towards financial stability. These resources aid with energy and water bills, food insecurity, financial education and empowerment, case management, and most recently, eviction prevention support. I want to note that the administration has identified an additional $5 million in funds to continue the eviction prevention program through a partnership with the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services and the Department of Housing and Community Development. The next pillar is building public safety. The FY 2024 budget funds 5 general fund positions to support the Victim Services Program in the Baltimore Police Department to help the agency reach the goal of providing victim services for all homicide and non-fatal shooting incidents. The budget also includes $441,000 to support the group violence reduction strategy. As you are aware, GVRS launched as a pilot in the Western District in fiscal year 2022, resulting in a 33.8% year-over-year decrease in both non-fatal shootings and homicides. The budget also creates 4 additional safety officer positions in the fire department and fully funds the Police Accountability Board that was created in 2022. Next, we have made significant investments to ensure we have clean and healthy communities. The fiscal year 2024 budget increased funding for solid waste services to stabilize service delivery by funding up to 10 crews to meet current staffing requirements for trash and recycling collection. And in an effort to help our seniors age in place, we provided funding to increase staffing at senior centers. And thanks to the partnership of the council, we provided initial funding to establish a new office for older adults. This budget also includes $16 million for ADA compliance. Also of note is that the recommended level of local funding for DOT in this year's CIP is the highest since 2014. And although we still have a long way to go, this investment moves us closer to maintaining a state of good repair. Next, we have equitable neighborhood development. Under equitable neighborhood development, the fiscal year 24 budget sets aside funds for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, includes $4.3 million towards the PSO Choice Neighborhoods project, and provides funding to begin design on the next phase of the Park Heights redevelopment project. We also created the Mayor's Office of Minority and Women's Business Development in the FY 2024 budget. The FY24 budget increases funding for under responsible stewardship. The FY24 budget increases funding for fleet replacement from $26 million to $35 million. The number of assets purchased annually will increase by 28% due to this investment and will help address the deferred maintenance backlog in fleet. The budget also supports additional positions in the Department of General Services to support the planning and delivery of capital projects. Additionally, the budget fully funds the Mayor's Office of Infrastructure Development, which serves as the city's lead agency in identifying, securing, managing, and monitoring federal IIJA funding, and creates 3 new positions for the Office of Equity and Civil Rights and funds a citywide equity assessment. Finally, I want to take a moment to highlight the Mayor's Office budget. As previously mentioned, the fiscal year 24 budget adds a new position to support the new Office for Older Adults and provides the office with a planning grant. This new office will live in the mayoralty. Additionally, the budget creates new positions in the Mayor's Office of Infrastructure Development, which was created to lead the oversight, coordination, and management of the Infrastructure Innovation and Jobs Act funds. You will hear from our infrastructure czar during the last half of my hearing. Now that I have highlighted key investments in the fiscal year 2024 budget, I want to shift gears to discuss how my office will manage performance, improve systems, and transform agency service delivery. In my first few months as the city's Chief Administrative Officer, I have outlined a vision and laid out a core set of priorities for my team. Our work will be anchored in a set of team values, and we will be led in all that we do by the best interests of the city's citizens of Baltimore. The CAO's team's priorities are as follows: improved service delivery. I have said before, and it remains true today, improving the delivery of core city services is my top priority as CAO. I will leverage the CAO staff to improve the government's delivery chain and identify opportunities to leverage new data and technology tools to improve the effectiveness of service delivery. Next is human capital and culture. My team will focus on modernizing our HR functions, focusing on employee recruitment and retention, and establishing a culture of excellence across city government. Next is systems reform. Moving Baltimore city government to a Tier 1 government will only be achieved through systems change. To that end, the Scott administration continues our efforts to implement end-to-end reform of key systems, including our procurement system. And finally, customer service and community engagement. As a leader, I pride myself on providing top-tier customer service to every customer of the government I encounter. I am responsive, transparent, and committed to securing resolutions to even the most challenging issues. And I expect this same level of service from every Baltimore City government employee. As such, we will invest in establishing and reinforcing customer service standards and doubling down on our efforts to engage our community. In the short time that Baltimore has had a CAO, we have forged critical partnerships with academic institutions and professional organizations to advance our use of data and technology tools to improve our service delivery. One example that I frequently highlight is our partnership with Carnegie Mellon as part of the mayor's 30-day vacant housing review. Through this partnership, our data team worked with Carnegie Mellon to use AI technology to identify buildings for emergency demolition. We are integrating this technology with computer-aided dispatch so that our first responders are aware of dangerous buildings before arrival. Other partnerships include our certification by Bloomberg Philanthropies as a Woodwork City, and our continued partnership with Beth Blower, the Associate Vice Provost for Public Sector Innovation at Johns Hopkins University, and the Bloomberg Center for Government Excellence. To achieve the bold vision laid out in the mayor's action plan and reinforced through the CAO team priorities, the administration will continue our efforts to build a robust agency performance management system that is agile and leverages a distinct set of performance tools ranging from CityStat, agency performance plans, and the mayor's action plans to hold agencies accountable for the achievement of specific goals and metrics. This comprehensive approach to agency performance will ensure that all parts of our government are better coordinated and working together to achieve our stated goals. The new agency performance plans will provide the city with a comprehensive framework and process for managing agency service delivery to date. Through our agency performance plans, agencies will work with OPI's performance team to set metrics and targets for key services each year. The agencies will report on their performance on these metrics, and the mayor and CAO will convene regular performance review meetings with each agency. The plans and reporting on performance will be published and shared with the public. The first set of agency performance plans will be published in late summer 2023. Now, I want to highlight just a few of the CAO's office successes. At the top of my presentation, I talked about how the CAO, or a professional management model, is a best practice in local government. As I close out my presentation, I want to highlight a few accomplishments of my team. The CAO led the city in a strategic prioritization process, developed the mayor's action plan, and introduced the transformation management model to city government. Additionally, the CAO introduced PayStat to help reduce the backlog of overdue invoices. Since September 2022, PayStat has helped reduce the value of late invoices by 72% and the number of late invoices by 53%. We also transitioned the city to a new customer portal for over 24 online payment processes, which included an enhanced customer experience for residents, improved security, and more payment options. We also launched a city service sprint and doubled down on our efforts to deliver core city services. To date, we have removed 844 graffiti markings, repaved nearly 5 miles of roads, and repaired almost 12,000 potholes. As my presentation draws to a close, Chairman Costello, I want to thank you and Council President Mosby for your continued partnership throughout the budget process. I believe our open communication and regular meetings to date have prepared the administration and the council to work together to ensure a positive and productive budget adoption process. Finally, as city administrator, my focus remains on how our government serves our citizens, how we measure our service delivery, and how we build and maintain a workforce capable of delivering on our promises. And I believe the FY2024 budget helps us do just that. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, CAO Leach. We've been joined by a few others, so I'll just run through. Councilman Ryan Dorsey, 3rd District member of the committee. Councilman Zeke Cohen, 1st District. Councilman Chris Burnett, 8th District member of the committee. Councilwoman Odette Ramos, 14th District. Council President Nick Mosby, Councilwoman Felicia Porter, 10th District, and Councilman Mark Conway, 4th District. Mr. President, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam CAO. I couldn't second your remarks about the ability of partnership and working and responsiveness from your perspective to date, so we truly, truly appreciate that. Jumping into questions, one question I have kind of flows over from the ARPA discussion to now. I know there's a decision with the last tranche of $80 million, 40 of which you had the breakdown about regarding the restoring of positions, full-time positions. Just trying to understand and explain to the council the rationale about taking one-time money and applying that to positions that are ultimately going to have to be full-time when we know there's so many vacancies throughout the city.
Thank you, Council President Mosby. So as it relates to our decision to restore general fund positions, one, I want to take a step back and talk about the intended purpose of ARPA, right? So we received ARPA money to help us recover from the pandemic. These were positions that were frozen as a part of the pandemic during that budget year. I think that was fiscal year 2021 when the pandemic hit in March and our budget was already prepared. And so in order to meet the demands of that budget, we actually had to go through and freeze a number of positions. What we were able to do with these ARPA dollars is to go back and provide funding for those positions that were frozen due to the pandemic. And so in my view, this is directly aligned to the purpose of recovery funds, and that is to help us recover from the pandemic, and these positions were directly impacted by the pandemic.
Understood. I think the way that the American Rescue Plan money was, the regs that were written, it's so ambiguous and so kind of wide open associated. And, I think the administration has leveraged that to do like a multitude of different things. I guess the concern is, ARPA runs out, and eventually we're going to have to pay for those positions out of the general fund, exacerbating like that thought process of like moving down that thought process. We know we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of vacancies. Why not just reclassify or unfreeze those positions in a different way and leverage the ARPA money to really try to drive a return on investment? I mean, the reality is, us creating a position for a year or a year and a half through ARPA that we have to eventually pay for down the road when we have vacancies on top of vacancies is one way to approach it. Or we could approach it that we have once in a lifetime to utilize this money. Let's utilize it in a way that really drives a return on investment, something that we can look at the goals, the objectives, key performance indicators that you kind of listed that are the mayor's initiatives, so we can look in 5 and 10 and 15 years and understand and know that this money was able to sustainably reproduce itself and maybe create some level of synergy with other things that is directly related to the mayor's priorities. I guess, again, the strategy is why take one-time money to bring up, funded positions that could have been utilized from other vacancies that are out there.
Yeah, so I appreciate that. I would offer that investing in our employees and adding critical personnel that is presenting a return on investment for the city of Baltimore. The general fund restoration positions, if I recall correctly, it's around 9, if I'm not mistaken, but I will get you the actual number.
It's 9.
Okay, great, thank you. So it is not a substantial amount of money when we look at the total $641 million, but I appreciate your line of questioning around the best use of those funds, especially when we know we're going to have to absorb those positions later on in our budget. I imagine we're going to spend a lot of time talking about vacancies, but I can start to touch on that now if you'd like me to.
Sure, just real quick. I think it's about a couple $1 million.
Yep.
But I think it kind of goes to the breadth of like the mentality around all of ARPA, which obviously the council has a lot of concerns and questions about the strategy of the way the money was spent. And this is just one or the other. This is not the first time that ARPA has been created ARPA money has been used to create temporary positions or temporary jobs. Again, there's a mentality of like we can either invest the money or we can either spend the money. And I think that when we're talking about, putting in jobs that we know are going to be full-time positions, that are going to be funded positions moving forward, and we take one-time grant money to kind of pay for them now, kind of goes against the methodology that finance has always taken in the past. I know there's going to be a lot of vacancy probably questions, so I'm just going to go to my second question, and then which kind of dovetails off this. Another issue that we're kind of seeing is like for the FEMA reimbursement, pandemic-related services that ended in May 11th. We know that many of those kind of were transitioned over to the general fund as well. Again, not necessarily sticking with the mentality that we've always used in the past. We know that that's not really sustainable. And the concern is with some of the things that were created potentially through ARPA, is that going to be a mentality moving forward? Knowing that, again, in the past, finance has always kind of pushed back on us doing those types of things.
Yep. So What I will offer to that is that a number of the services that were started during the pandemic are still needed. While numbers are substantially lower than they are, COVID still exists, right? So we still need to do things like provide hotel services for individuals experiencing homelessness. We still need to have contact tracers, especially as we go into the winter months and we could potentially see a new variant or an uptick. And so those are services that are still needed because they are still connected to the pandemic. And so what we have done, we haven't necessarily moved a majority of those items over to the general fund. A lot of those items are funded with ARPA. And the rationale behind using ARPA is one that is, in my view, the purpose of the recovery funds more than anything. It was to support cities that were grappling with all of these increased costs due to the pandemic. And so what we chose to do is a general accounting approach, first in, first out, right? So we leverage CARES Act dollars that the city still had, and in places where we had FEMA reimbursable services, we continue to leverage FEMA to get reimbursement before moving those things to ARPA so that we could have a longer runway with our ARPA dollars.
So I guess the way that the council would like to just better understand the strategy is
Sure.
At the end of this rainbow, when CORE run out, when ARPA runs out, FEMA's run out, what is going to be the ultimate strategy of all these positions, of all these initiatives and services that have been created? And I guess that is the concern of leveraging, again, one-time money to fund funded positions when we have so many vacancies, hundreds and hundreds of vacancies throughout the city of Baltimore. Possibly could that money have been shifted to some of those specific services that you mentioned associated with the spillout from the pandemic?
Yeah, a number of those positions were, one, FEMA reimbursable, and they were active in our recovery efforts. Like, for example, when we talk about contact tracers, and we've significantly reduced the number of contact tracers since the pandemic, right? Like, we no longer have the number of contact tracers that we had during the pandemic. So what you'll see, especially through the health department and some of the services that they provide, is we didn't just continue to fund those positions. We actually moved them off of the city's payroll, right? We no longer need those positions at that level, and so we made the strategic decision to no longer fund them at that level, but still continue to fund those positions. So again, what I believe you will see are us funding positions that are needed for the city's recovery from the pandemic. What we are doing and what we have built into our ARPA process is an evaluation, and we have a number of evaluation partners. And so what we will have to do over the course of the next few years is to evaluate the programs and services that we were able to stand up as a part of ARPA, and to decide which services we can continue to afford as a city, and we will have to make the hard decision to no longer fund some services or absorb some things that we started with ARPA.
Thank you. And to that point, could you provide, I guess, the breakdown of the 9 positions that will be restored and the roles and responsibilities and how they kind of correlate to the issue around the pandemic right now?
Yeah. Will do.
Nate and Sophia, you guys got that one? Thank you very much. Thank you. CAO Leach, I want to agree with the concurrence by the council president of the nature of our plethora of discussions over the past month leading up to budget hearings. Really appreciate your willingness to sit down. I think these conversations have been very productive and have already helped lead to more efficient budget hearings. I have one quick question. I have a few questions, but one quick one. Mm-hmm. Can you update us on the status of finding a permanent director for the Department of Public Works, as well as a director for the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement?
Yes, thank you for that question. So for the Director of Public Works, that position has been posted, I think, for at least 60 days, if I'm not mistaken. I'll get you the exact timeline that we posted that position. We are actively recruiting. We've received a number of resumes, and those resumes are solid, but I'd like to see some stronger candidates. And so we are actually going to hire or bring on a recruitment firm to assist us in identifying the right candidate for the DPW director role.
So at this time, still in the recruitment process?
Yeah, it's an active recruitment.
And do we have a plan in place for when July 1 hits for an acting director?
Yes.
Okay. Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement?
So we are starting the recruitment for that position.
Okay. Do we have a plan in place for after, I believe, also July 1st?
Yes,
We have a plan?
for an interim.
Okay. Last one I forgot. Do we have plans to formally appoint Corinne Johnson to be the DOT director?
Yes.
That's the answer I was looking for. Thank you. Councilman Burnett and then Councilman Dorsey. Oh, and I just want to take a moment to acknowledge Deputy CAO Simone Johnson, who's been spectacular to work with. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my first question, because we just had a hearing on this with DGS and a multitude of agencies around maintenance of city buildings. There was a prioritization of funds for I believe the Northwest or Northern Cap Center for renovation, roof renovations. Can you speak to the prioritization of that particular center, I guess, above some of the other ones, all of which probably do have extensive capital needs? And this is sort of dovetailing off of that hearing where we were sort of focusing on like the conditions of city buildings that both staff are working in as well as our constituents are coming into, and sort of the sort of long list of deferred maintenance in these buildings.
Yep. So what we tend to do is, one, we work with the agencies to identify those buildings where there are just major issues that might rise to the level of safety issues. And so we compare our buildings and the needs of those buildings based off of kind of those safety needs. I think with the Northern Cap in particular, one, when you start to talk about roof issues and you start to talk about HVAC replacements, that rises to the level of kind of moving above some of the other types of issues that we might see in our other Cap centers. The agency submitted the Northern Cap Center as a part of the CIP project, and it got prioritized with funding for this year.
Got it. Thank you. The last round of hearings, your predecessor, CEO Shorter, presented at a hearing that talked about a multi-agency system that was being implemented to help cross-collaboration, sort of like the conversation we have every year about like, why are there so many different agencies mowing grass instead of one? Like, can you give us an update as to how the implementation of those systems is working? And what we can expect as far as sort of long-term, more of a collaborative interagency workspace under your leadership?
Yep. So we have a multi-agency coordinating task force that meets weekly. Alan Robinson, who's in the room, he's one of our assistant city administrators. He leads that work, and it brings together a number of our operational business units and our operational agencies to coordinate around everything from inspections to mowing or any number of issues that come up on a weekly basis. And that's just one tool that we're currently using to help better coordinate, especially among our operational business units. In addition, I've brought a new approach into the office where we're using what I call it's an agile approach, or we're using these agile tiger teams where we're able to go deep on particular issues that we're seeing. And we start to diagnose some of those issues. So for example, we actually use the agile approach around recycling. And so we brought together DHR, DPW, DOT, our data office, the recovery office as well, and kind of had this multi-pronged approach, bringing these cross agencies together to solve this issue or this challenge around recycling, because on its surface, it appears to be a DPW issue, but really it's an issue of human capital and fleet and any number of other challenges. Risk management was also a part of that conversation. And so that is what we're doing through the CAO's office, is we're breaking through those silos and coordinating with our agency partners to really start to really dig deep into some of these issues and where possible, make some systems change.
And the other, just a quick follow-up to that, the council had, and this is the last round of hearings, had requested internal access those systems so we could better follow up with complaints that were coming into our office. Is that something that we can resume that conversation around giving the council more access to sort of some of these internal processes, multi-agency processes that you all are working on? If there's like a dashboard, internal dashboard or something that we can use?
Yes. So there's actually, I'm not sure if the chief data officer is here, but we have been testing a report for council around 311 closures. Before sharing that with council, there's some work I want to do around the 311 closure process. But we have actually been working together around some of the constituent issues that you all have and trying to figure out how we can supply more data to help you all just monitor and track the closure of some of the constituents' concerns that come in.
Got it. Thank you. Those are my first two, Mr. Chair. I'll hold off for the next round.
Thank you. Councilman Dorsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, more of a comment, less of a question. Thanks for what you're doing. I appreciate working with you. I appreciate the work that you're doing. I appreciate that the city of Baltimore gets to have you in your role. Thank you.
Thank you.
Part of my perception of the city administrator's office from the outset has been about having an entity that's outside of city agencies and that isn't quite the mayor's office to make sure agencies are putting in place processes that are efficient and effective. And I have spent considerable time digging into certain processes and continue to see challenges, particularly around a couple areas in DOT. Surprise, surprise. Around parking enforcement is one, and the other that I think I've already mentioned here today is in the process of tech contracting for street resurfacing and the necessary coordination for complete streets planning and execution within a given annual cycle. I guess, can you talk about how the CAO, about how the office is working, I guess from a higher level than the agency itself, to understand how these such processes can be improved and how we discover where the deficiencies and room for improvement are? And can you just talk about that a little bit, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I talked a little bit in my presentation about our performance management approach, and I touched a little bit on this transformation management model. And so in developing a comprehensive performance management approach within government, it allows us to have multiple tools to get to some of the issues that you're talking about, right? On the process improvement side, we have the ability to leverage a couple of different approaches. One, I talked about our Agile Tiger teams. There's also an opportunity to really use some Lean Six Sigma within the government to start to dig into and unpack some of the challenges around our processes. And it is work that through our performance team, so the Office of Performance and Innovation, also our Chief Data Officer, and with the support of our Deputy City Administrator and Assistant City Administrators, that is the type of work that we are doing, is we are identifying the right tools to solve the right challenges that our agencies have. I will be clear and transparent, as I always am. We have some talented leaders and talented staff within the organization. We also have some major challenges around our processes. And I don't think that is, I don't think that is new breaking information for anyone in this government. And there are a number of processes that need wholesale reform within the city, right? I think one of the biggest that we've talked about a little bit is procurement reform. But I think what we are doing through the city administrator's office is identifying and prioritizing some of those challenges especially with our operational agencies, and prioritizing which ones we need to solve and which ones we need to move on quickly. even though there are any number of process improvements that we could take on. So to answer your question of how we do it, again, it is leveraging our staff and the expertise in our performance team to really dig into some of the systems challenges, into the process improvement opportunities that we have using and leveraging our different performance tools that we have. In that case, it would be Lean Six Sigma, I think.
Thank you. So, do you have a master list, or do your deputies have like their own internal kind of master list of like what the processes are that we've identified that need fixing, and do we have them like sorted in like kind of order of priority? Because I'd like to know if
If yours is up there?
if my things have like made the priority list, because they've been my priority list for a long time.
Right. Yeah, we can talk afterwards about your priority list. But to that point, this actually just happened a couple of weeks ago where my team did an offsite. And what we were able to do, and this again was with the support of the good folks over at Hopkins and the Center for Government Innovation, is we actually went through this prioritization process of what we're going to accomplish over the next 90 to 180 days. And to no surprise of anyone in this room, most of it was on improving agency service delivery, and some process improvement things came up. So I can share with you some of the permitting came up, for example, as an area that over the next 180 days we want to move on very quickly. I mean, of course, procurement is always top of mind. So there are a number of 311 closures. So there are a number of processes that we identified that we said we would tackle over the next 180 days, and we can provide that to you.
I would love to have that list. Thank you. You kind of led into my other question here. You talk about 311 closures. I kind of think the perennial question here is about 311 feedback, systems talking to one another, and the challenges that I think largely revolve around staff training within agencies and how to put the right feedback in the right fields in the right system, and whether the systems are talking to one another and then making its way back to the public-facing part of Salesforce, right? So like, the classic example is I put in a 311 service request, and 4 hours later it says closed through an agency-specific workforce management system or something like that. I'm surprised I don't know the exact wording. I've read it so many times. But things that tell the public and council members and people following up absolutely nothing about what was done. And I take particular issue knowing this because, dealing with this because I log into the back end of Salesforce all the time. Like, not a whole lot of people do, I don't think. But I look in there and I see that there is more information available in Salesforce, and I see the field that public-facing response comes from, and I see that something else could have gone in that box, but it went in this other box. And we're not connecting these things together in a way that helps people to understand how we're actually operating.
No, I received that. So 311 is one of my areas that I'm digging into next. So I think during our agency sprints, 311 is a key. It's how we track how we deploy REISs out for our agency sprints. And just one classic example is around illegal dumping, for example, because it requires partnership between DPW as well as the Department of Housing and Community Development, because they do the investigation. And so at one point, there was some challenges around illegal dumping closures that happened before the cleaning actually happened, because it was really the investigation, right? And so through our sprints, which We have a sprint stat, and we, of course, still do our clean stat as well. That's where we're actually able to really start to unpack some of these challenges around our systems and around 311 closures. And so because of that, I'm now doing some, I'm looking at just what we can do around 311 and just kind of digging deeper into 311. So to answer your question, that's one of the areas of reforms that I'm interested in and will be working on over the next few months.
Thank you. I can tell you, I look forward greatly to banging my head on the desk at the next discussion of closed means closed, which we've had every year that I've been on the council. And, you know, if closed doesn't mean closed, at least hopefully closed to me can mean closed, but also this thing tells me that it was referred to this other thing, and I can go here to find out what that actual next step is instead of just being told it's closed and no further information. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Conway, then Councilwoman Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam CAO. Appreciate your work, and I know you put a lot of time into this. So, I wanted to first focus on how the office is structured within the budget and the budget book. It's not in any way separated out from the mayoralty, and I was wondering why that is. It makes it very difficult. I think much like conversations about Office of Recovery, makes it very difficult to understand the changes going on in the office. And I don't, maybe you can answer, or maybe finance can answer that.
Sure, I can address it. It's a part of the mayoralty. That's why it's included in the way that it is within the budget and not broken out as a separate office.
Yeah, I think part of the difficulty there is we've seen a pretty significant increase in spending in the mayor's office. And I think understanding all the work that your office is doing, I guess technically within the mayor's office, it's very difficult sometimes to tell where that money's going. And so I don't know if there's something we can work out for the next time we pull together the budget. I don't know if there's something that we need to do in structuring the office or otherwise, but just to make sure that it's very easy for us to understand how we're spending money. So just a note. The other question I had was regarding a statement you made a while back about the structure of the office and sort of where you wanted to take the office. And you mentioned DC as a model for that. That office has significantly more staff. I know today you outlined the full structure of the office. Where are we in that transition? Is that still what we imagine this office to be? And what would that then finally look like?
Sure. So I want to be clear. I never said I was taking us to a DC model. I just
Sure.
referenced DC as a model that I've worked in. I've also worked in Mecklenburg County, and their model is different than the model that we have in the District of Columbia government. I think we have to build a model for Baltimore, and that is what we are actively doing and what I am actively doing. I think the structure that we have now, so when my predecessor was here, it was him and one other person, right? I don't think that given the types of issues that we are expected to tackle and address in the reforms that we are expected to implement as a government, that is sufficient. And so what we have done is we've added additional professional capacity to assist with that management and oversight of agencies. And I think what we have now is a really solid start that with a top-tier team that really is the envy of any other city manager's office, right? And that is what I am building, is a strong team that can really go in and dig deep with our agencies, but then also do the systems change work that is necessary. And so we've added those 2 assistant city administrators. I've added a director of strategy and policy. and we will continue to do the hard work of reforming our government. It is not my intention. I think, at my last hearing, I referenced DC, and I think they have a team of like 90 people. It is not my intention to take Baltimore's city administrator's office to that size. I think where we are now is sufficient, and we will deliver with the resources that we have available to us.
Okay, I think my first and second questions tied together, I think it gave you a little insight as to why I asked. I think it's important for us to sort of differentiate between the sort of functioning of the city and the work that your office does and the mayor's office and the sort of like vision and direction and goals for the city. And I agree. I think your office is really, really important towards making sure the trains show up on time. And to that effect, there is some more robust infrastructure I think needed. The question I have is, what does that finally look like? I guess today we are doing everything we need to do, but I think we'll continue to ask that question as we go forward. So.
Yep. Can I ask a follow-up? What do you mean we're not doing everything we need to do?
No, I said I didn't say
okay.
that. I didn't say that.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I said you said we were doing everything. We had everything we needed. That things are where we need to be.
Oh yes, I think.
But I think to fully address, like we're talking about 301, and we can go on for days about 301 and some of the challenges that arise in having old antiquated systems talk to new, now antiquated systems in their own way. And the way that brings up challenges in communication with residents around 301. So, sorting through those problems, I think is going to take a lot of more people or different people doing with different skill sets than we currently have. And so that's your job to figure out. So, that's all I got for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I had a quick question. I wanted to follow up on a hearing that I asked about a few months ago related to communication to the council. I wanted to know if there are any verified standard operating procedures from that hearing.
About the departure of executives?
Departure of executives, but also regarding succession planning as well.
Yep. So where we are with that is, I think, one, we're having ongoing conversations with you. I think deferred a meeting until post the budget, where we'll talk through kind of our succession planning module within Workday, and then from there we'll continue to work with you and get feedback on just what types of standard operating procedures you would like to see in place around succession planning, especially after we are able to show you what we currently have in place within our module within Workday. Additionally, I think we shared with this body our succession planning framework that was developed by DHR and that we've shared with the cabinet.
Okay, thank you. And your previous predecessor had an interagency working group that was going for a year. Are there any recommendations or lessons learned that came out of their interagency group that he started?
What was the group focused on human resources?
It was focused on bringing agencies together, and the previous predecessor went to a few of my community groups and indicated that he was going to come out with a plan, a strategy, a framework to bring agencies together. I wanted to know if there are any recommendations from that previous interagency working group that he started.
I'll have to follow up with you offline to ensure that I understand which working group you're talking about. We have a ton, as you can imagine. There is the one interagency working group that we referenced earlier that tackles issues ranging from permitting and any number of operational issues. But it sounds to me like this is around human resources?
Yeah, this was around human resources and agency and operations effectiveness.
Yep, so let me follow up and I'll get additional details for you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. CA Leach, thank you very much for choosing Baltimore. I'm glad you're here as well. I have a number of questions. You mentioned that there's a few things that you're going to be looking into within the next 180 days. Can you tell us what those are specifically? Are those what were in the chart procurement, permitting, and hiring, or are there other things that you mentioned doing things in 180 days twice, so I just want to get a sense of what exactly that will be hearing back from you within that time frame.
Yep. So we are currently working with our partners at Hopkins, and they're actually so we actually went through a prioritization exercise with my team. So when I shared the slide that I shared with you all where I identified the CAO team priorities, we then spent some time as a team going through and prioritizing what are the systems or what are some of the challenges we want to tackle over the next 90 to 180 days. We then worked with our colleagues at the Center for Government Excellence. They are now documenting the work that happened through our prioritization exercise. We'll be sharing that back out with the team, and then I'm happy as we pull together the final plan to share with you all some of the top things that we'll be tackling in that time frame.
Okay, so you're not prepared to talk about that today. You're going to send that out once you're done.
I can talk broadly about what we discussed as a team. A lot of it was a part of the exercise was determining what requires additional research and or study versus things that we can move on very quickly, right? So some of this is, us deciding to do further research about a particular issue. For example, this is not one, but leveraging AI technology to detect potholes, for example, right? That might come under improved city services. And so instead of saying that we are going to implement new AI technology, that might be a thing that we study within the first 90 to 100 days and then make recommendations about whether or not we should move forward with implementation. So I can talk broadly through some of the things that came up through that process, and or I can just submit to you following budget hearings where our priority projects are.
Well, you had mentioned permitting as one of them. So just in the last few minutes. So
yeah,
that's why I was.
So with permitting, for example, that one fell under STAT. So that's the other part of the exercise that we went through as a team. Is we have a number of performance tools at our disposal. Everyone is very familiar with Baltimore's storied history around City Stat, and so. But in addition to City Stat, we have other tools that we can leverage as well. I already talked about using a Lean Six Sigma. We have agency performance plans. We have this Agile Tiger team and these cross-functional teams that we can use. And so we went through an exercise of identifying which issue can be solved with which approach. And so permitting actually fell under STAT, and it got a lot of support for the need to implement and stand up a permitting stat. And so that is something that falls on our priority list. I can't remember if it's at 90 or 180 days, but you will see a permit stat soon.
We're going to need it. We need it today. Okay, well, I guess we'll look for that list after you've done that evaluation. I guess what I was thinking was that you had mentioned permitting and then that there would be these topics, but what I'm hearing you say is that there are certain approaches to different issues, and what you're going to be outlining for us is which approach to which issue. And that, and what the time frame is going to end up being. Not necessarily, we're going to do permitting, we're going to do procurement, we're going to do hiring in that sort of simple way. It's, you're trying to take a much more strategic and analytic approach to it. And so you're going to give us additional detail.
Yeah, and okay. The other thing that I will offer, and this goes back to the, Councilmember Conway's in the discussion that we just had around staffing capacity, is we have to have the capacity to do this work as well. And I'm cognizant of the capacity of my own team. And so I think a part of this is also being able to leverage partnerships. So in that slide where I mentioned Carnegie Mellon and I mentioned Hopkins and even our partners at Morgan and other universities, there's an opportunity for us to add capacity by partnering with some of those institutions to help us on some of these projects that we can move pretty quickly, and especially on research. I think the other piece of this is we have to be able to determine when we should bring in outside support and consultant help when we just don't have the capacity to do it internally. So that is also going to be a part of the analysis, and it is a part of the work that we are, again, doing. I think everyone heard about the Vice Provost for Public Sector Innovation spending a couple days in City Hall, and this is the type of work that she's been helping me lead on.
Well, we look forward to that list. I appreciate that. I don't know if we need to make a formal request for that, or you're going to be sending it out to us anyway. And then the other question I had was around hiring. I think you saw in the document that the committee sent, I think the last line was about, in particular, the in-rem lawyers being hired. We've also seen, so there's been delays in hiring. We've got the money, and there's delays in hiring. We also experienced the same thing with the new Rangers ambassadors, whatever we're calling them. I just think that we shouldn't be waiting a year to hire people after we get the money. So I was going to address this to HR, but it looked like in your one of the things that you wanted to work on is hiring. So what is the approach to address that? Because as you know, I've talked about it all the time, the crisis of vacant and abandoned properties is huge. We have this opportunity with the circuit court. We really need more lawyers. And we got through a lot of pushing from many council members, including myself, to be able to get more money to be able to hire more people. We went and recruited a bunch of folks that we thought would be great for it, and then they didn't hear for months and months and months after they applied. And that seems unreasonable that should be happening. And that's just one example of how that's been happening. So what do we need to do to change that? How can we be helpful? Is that, I guess this is one of your 180-day things that you're thinking about as well, because I can't accept the fact that we can't ramp up the in-rem process quickly enough to get this taken care of.
Yep. And so in my response back to the council, I provided an update on the 4 in-rem attorneys.
I read it.
And so we actually made offers to 4 attorneys. Only one of those attorneys actually accepted the position. And so that dovetails into another challenge that we're having, which is around our competitiveness around pay. And so with the in-rem attorneys, we'll actually have to go back out to the market again to see if we can identify attorneys that are willing to support the work. So it is, I think, with human resources, it is there are a number of challenges that are interwoven. So yes, recruitment is, a challenge, but that's also coupled with, the competitiveness of our pay. Obviously, we have some systems challenges as well, and so we actually need to be kind of working on all of those things in tandem if we really want to move the needle around our human capital.
Yeah, I appreciated the update. I think that in a couple of the cases that I know of, it was just HR and DHCD just took too long to get to them. So it's just, we have to figure out the best way to make this happen. But I appreciate that you'll be looking into that as well. It's not just in-rem, it's just all over as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a lot more questions, but I will yield.
Thank you. CAO Leach, what is the formal process for notifying the council when there's a senior level personnel change that's made? So for example, when we hire a new person, such as the chief procurement officer this morning, or the announcement that went out, is there a formal process for informing the council?
So thank you for that question. So that is a process that I am working on. And so what has traditionally happened, or at least happened since I've been in the role, I would say maybe about 85% of the time, is I have notified the council prior to the start of any new individuals within government. When it comes to notification of departures, I generally send a memorandum to the entire cabinet. I then forward that memorandum to the city council as well whenever we have a departure. I think it depends on the position. And so, for example, for the procurement officer role, I would have liked to and should have sent that to the cabinet as well as to the council. And so that is one that should have gone formally to you in the way that I have been sending the past announcements of new staff.
Thank you. I've certainly noticed improvements in the process since you've been personally involved, but anything you can do to continue to improve that process to make sure we're informed before we read about it in the press would be greatly appreciated. Councilman Cohen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, City Administrator Leach. Do want to appreciate the process we underwent to start the Office of Aging with you and my colleague, Councilmember Middleton, and Dr. Jarasa and other folks. Really appreciated the collaborative spirit and thought it was a good test case of council and administration working together on a shared priority. So thank you for that. Did want to ask, and I know that Mr. Garbar's going to be coming up later, but just trying to understand sort of where the Office of Infrastructure starts versus the Office of Planning, and how they intersect, how they work together. I got a briefing the other day on the Office of Infrastructure and it was a good briefing, but was still a little bit confused about what I perceived to be some potential overlap between those offices. And so was wondering if you could articulate sort of how those break down and where one starts and the other ends.
Sure. So as I stated earlier in my remarks, the Infrastructure Development Office was established really for two things. One, it was around the influx of dollars we hope to receive through the IIJA. And much like we are doing with ARPA, we want to ensure that we have an entity that is there to pursue those dollars, but then also once we receive those dollars, help us with management oversight. And in the case of the Infrastructure Office, they will actually be doing some project management, given that these are going to be massive capital projects that come into the city of Baltimore. The other piece of the Infrastructure Office, which we don't talk about as much, I think one of the systems that we can improve and that we've seen some challenges around is actually our capital project delivery chain. And so in my predecessor's thinking about establishing the Infrastructure Office, that also was a part of the strategy, is bringing on additional project management support that lives in a central agency that can support these massive capital projects and provide that project management level support. And so that is what we are doing with the Infrastructure Development Office. How infrastructure dovetails and coordinates with planning, it does it in a couple of ways, and Director Garbark will go into greater detail shortly, but we actually established an infrastructure coordinating committee of which planning is a member. So there are a number of agencies that touch capital projects and require capital funds. And so all of those entities are coming together under that ICC structure, which is led by the Mayor's Office of Infrastructure Development. The other piece of this is we're using, for example, we have our capital improvement program, which is not funded at the level that it really needs to be in order to tackle some of the challenges that we have in our aging city, right? But we have additional funding coming in through ARPA, we have funding coming in through IIJA, and so what we now need to be able to do as a government is to braid those funds, right? And to identify which types of funds we should use on which projects so that we can really extend the tail or extend the life of the dollars that we are seeing within the city to help move us along on some of our aging infrastructure projects, for example. And so that is what we are doing through the through the Infrastructure Coordinating Committee, is really coordinating around all of the different pots of money that are going towards infrastructure projects within the city of Baltimore.
No, I appreciate that. I can definitely see the need for support around the Infrastructure Act and all the rest. It just seems like there is similar functionality between sort of what capital planning happens in the planning department versus this office, and that, just hope that there's a seamless sort of transition and that it doesn't create duplication or any confusion as we move forward.
I would say that planning probably would say they don't have the capacity to manage the influx of dollars that we hope to see through the IIJA. And Also, the other big important piece of this, and Director Garbark, actually, again, this was one of the things that came out of this partnership with the Bloomberg Center for Government Excellence, but he was able to meet with Bloomberg Philanthropies. They have a team that is working with cities across the country around infrastructure dollars and and helping with building the capital stack. These projects are going to require substantial matching funds from the city. This is not like ARPA and just us receiving a tranche of money. We actually have to match the projects that are coming in. And when you talk about bridges and you talk about roads, those are large-scale projects. And so we have to get creative in building a capital stack. And so that's what we are doing with the Mayor's Office of Infrastructure Development, is figuring out how we can go after as much money as we can, but also figure out how we can creatively build that stack so that we can, do those projects in the city of Baltimore. And to me, that is over and above what our CIP team in planning does.
No, I appreciate that. My second question relates to something Councilmember Dorsey was saying, and it has to do with just faith in the 311 system. I hear from a lot of constituents will say something to the effect of 311 is broken. I tried using it, like you said, it got closed out. Closed in this case clearly did not mean closed. It meant that it was transferred from one agency. I would say if there is one thing that your office can do that would be a tremendous service to Baltimore, it is to fix from top to bottom the 311 system, because I find that a large amount of my office's time, and I would think this tracks across the council, is dealing with constituent service where folks no longer trust 311 and aren't willing to do it. And what I will say to folks is, look, if you don't use 311, then there's no official record of it, and it makes it much harder to, it's the proof point that we need in order to move the service. And so we really push it, but the level of, I think, dysfunction and chaos within 311 and sort of within the transfer of, in workforce, the transfer of the information to the different agencies. Like, for example, if there's a pothole that requires both DOT and DPW, there's multi-agency involvement. It just feels broken, I think, to a lot of folks. And so, again, I heard you say you have your list of prioritization, and I think that makes sense, and could talk about permits as well as other things as well. But I am curious just to push a little more on 311 specifically, because it feels like that is the way we are asking communities to interface with their government. And if and when it does not work to the satisfaction of a constituent, they lose faith in government and they stop using it. And then they're frustrated with us, the collective us, the mayor and us. And it just creates, in some ways, a cycle of dependency on city council members or on a non-direct line to the agency that is really problematic. So I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about kind of immediate next steps as it relates to 311.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think, I've been working very closely with you and a number of the members of the council around around a lot of constituent services requests that come in. Quite frankly, it caused me to dedicate a member of my team to help me follow through and coordinate with the agencies around some of these constituent services requests that come from council, because it is a lot. And a lot of the requests require that cross-agency collaboration and coordination. And quite frankly, many of them, they're not just simple potholes, right? Sure. I think the one that we've been working on with the sinkhole that requires engineering, and it requires coordination between DOT and DPW, for example. And something like that going into 311 might not result in the right output or outcome, right, for example. And so what we have to be able to train our staff on is when they escalate those things. like, for example, the issue that you and I have been working on around the sinkhole. But as far as it relates to 311, again, I think unprompted, I started talking about my own interest in digging into the 311 system. And so I actually am working with Director Carter, who I know is here, and his team on really doing that deep dive on 311 so that we can decide which tool. I've talked to you all a lot about the different tools that we can leverage in the CAO's office to really start to dig into some of the challenges and the systems issues within 311. I think it's going to be multi-pronged, right? I think a part of it might be training. And I think there's a strong training element and component as it relates to 311 that we could implement that could help, that could result in some immediate reforms or changes. I think that's one piece of it, and a large piece of it as well, right? A piece of it might be around just the technology itself. And I think what we can do is through our process, our assessment process, one, what I always like to do, and I always ask the team, is I always look at what other jurisdictions are doing and how other 311 systems are operating to see if there are best practices that we can bring here. So that's going to be kind of the first phase of the work is what is currently happening with our system now? What are the challenges that we're seeing? Are there other jurisdictions who are facing these same challenges? If so, how were they able to leverage and change their 311 system to evolve to address those types of challenges? We are not the only city in America that requires cross-agency collaboration to solve some of the issues that come in through our 311 system. So I think there's an opportunity for us to do a little bit of digging into other 311 systems to see how we can enhance and improve our system.
I appreciate that, and I will just say that I think the messaging from us and from the mayor and from you as well is always start with 311.
Yeah, they should.
And it's important from a stat perspective and understanding our own data and everything else. But again, when we message use 311 and then folks don't get a satisfactory response, and there's multiple 311s that have gone in and they're just not seeing action, it undermines our credibility, your credibility, city government's credibility. So definitely appreciate that investigation. Happy to be helpful in any way that we can, because I just think it's hugely important for how folks perceive the effectiveness of city government.
Yep, and just one final point, 311 is the system of record. Even when we are addressing constituent concerns, I still often ask them, even if we're handling this outside of the 311 system, to input it in the 311 system or give me the SR number. Because again, as you mentioned, that is our system of record. That is how we collect data around issues. That is also at times how we do resource allocation. And so we need to continue to have our residents input information into the 311 system. But I receive your point around kind of the output and or the outcomes from that system and how we need to improve that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam CAO.
Thank you. CAO Leach, we were talking about attorneys a little while ago,
Yes.
and specifically the pay that we offer them. Do you know what's the salary range that we're offering versus what the other rates are in the surrounding counties?
I will get that information from DHCD, and that is specifically for the in-rem attorneys, not for the law department attorneys, for example.
Yes. And I understand we've made significant increases to the law department attorney pay structure. But I'm curious for this one. A common sentiment that we continue to hear in the community is that, the amount that we pay can't be an excuse for or justification for not having filled those positions. And obviously they serve a critical need. Thank you. Nate, Sophia, you guys got that one? Thank you. Councilman, I think we're back to Burnett and then Dorsey, if I'm not mistaken. Well, that's what we're gonna do. Burnett and then Dorsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to double back to a question that Councilman Conway asked about mayorality. When I looked at the previous budget year, and of course I'll close my calculator. It looks like there's 8.3 million in the FY2024 budget between special events, special projects. Those numbers are significantly higher than the previous fiscal year. Can you speak to, I guess, one, what do those buckets encompass? Because to his point, there's really there's no detail on what special events or special projects are. And then could you speak to what the pretty significant increase from the previous fiscal year, which I apologize, it was 240,000 in FY23, and it's 8.3 million now. With the increase, it's a pretty big bump for sort of unidentified events and projects.
Yep. So a couple things, and then I'll also have the budget team to offer some additional information as well. So there are a number of things that fall into the special events bucket. So funding for I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank. AFRAM. I was going to say Artscape. Funding for AFRAM, for example, comes out of that special events budget. Also, oftentimes when conventions come to the city, they do require funding from the city, and so that funding for those conventions would come out of that bucket. Also, in that bucket specifically this year is our requirement around CIAA, which, Laura, is it 1.5 million?
I believe it'll be 2 million.
2 million.
Next year.
Yep. So 2 million, which was our commitment to having the CIAA tournament come to the city of Baltimore. We committed $2 million to the CIAA, and if I'm not mistaken, it increases over time, and so now it is at $2 million. So those are the types of things that fall into that special events and/or special projects bucket.
Got it. Okay. And I guess just seconding that in future budget cycles, if we could get a little bit more of a explanation in the book, it would be helpful for us to get a better picture of what that is. Because when you look at it just on the surface, it's like, well, what is going on here? The next question I had, and perhaps this is for you, but it may not be. Very interested in the implementation of municipal broadband, but I know we have BSIT later, so I don't know if it's better to ask them that, but I'm sure you're overseeing the expansion of this program.
Yeah, so I'll provide very high-level remarks, but I think we actually have a municipal, we have a BDE, a broadband and digital equity director that is within BSIT, and I'm sure that a good portion of their presentation will kind of talk through the timeline for implementation of their ARPA investment. But I'll just talk very high level, and so we have worked with BSIT, especially through the Recovery Office, to establish funds. I think it was around 30 million, if I'm not mistaken, for broadband and digital equity. And so BSIT is leading that work. They have a pretty comprehensive timeline for implementation. I think last week just had a convening around digital equity in the city. They have a rollout plan of when they will be expanding to recreation centers and libraries and other facilities. The library is also a pretty strong partner around our broadband and digital equity work, or at least on the digital equity side. So BSIT will be able to detail the timeline that we will see implementation of their efforts.
Okay, thank you. And last question. Last year, we as in my office, worked with your team, the mayor's office team, MOGR, to request 2 pins for the LGBTQ office. Couldn't really make out, and maybe I missed it, where those sit, or where the hiring sits for those positions and the expansion of that office.
Yep. So those positions are in the mayoralty. So I don't think they appeared in last year's budget, but they are in this year's budget, and we're actively hiring for those 2 positions.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Did Councilman Stokes We'll jump to him when he gets back. Conway and then Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam CEO, one of the questions you and I have been talking about a lot about has been around like the regular follow-up and follow-through with agencies. And can you talk to me a little bit about how your office thinks about that? And we'll just start there.
Yes. Follow through as it relates to constituent concerns or?
Regular oversight of agencies.
Sure. So in my presentation, I detailed a few things. So one, we talked about the agency performance planning process that we are actively going through. We'll actually see our first agency performance plans in August of this year. And so as a part of that agency performance planning process, which I think is really a missing link in our performance management and oversight system, we will actually be doing at least quarterly, if not more frequent, oversight of agency performance. So the agencies are developing individual performance plans where they detail by service the performance metrics, their goals, and the anticipated outcomes that we'll be holding them accountable to on a quarterly basis when they meet with the mayor and they meet with myself. In addition to that, the previous hearing, we talked about ARPA. We have infrastructure dollars that are flowing into the city. And so we actually are going to be convening agencies around ARPA spend as well, as we have to ensure that we are moving those critical resources through our system seamlessly. Which we've talked about through our city stat process, we bring a number of agencies together regularly. I think bi-weekly, we bring the public safety sector agencies together through police stat, or in what I hope we would call public safety stat, because this is much more bigger, the issue is much larger than police. We also, through Clean Stat, bring a number of our operational business units together, and that also happens bi-weekly and/or I think now we're at a monthly frequency around Clean Stat, but at one point we were doing the bi-weekly with Clean Stat. Also Pay Stat, which I've talked about, so we bring everybody together, especially our largest agencies with the largest number of overdue invoices, and I convene that meeting monthly, and we have a Tiger Team approach led by Steve Sharkey in our Office of Innovation, where he is meeting even more frequently with the high flyer agencies that have the most overdue invoices. So again, there are a number of ways that we are convening and bringing our agencies together. Obviously, we also have our cabinet meetings where we bring the entire cabinet together and we cover a broad swath of issues as well.
So to that end, how do we know, for instance, if I were to ask today, how often our permits are filled within a certain amount of time? How would we know that? Is that something that we would get regularly, or would a problem have to arise in order to identify it?
We could probably run a report. I mean, we have pretty robust data and data
I appreciate
systems.
that.
Right.
I think my question is, in what form would that come up?
In what forum would it come up?
Yeah.
It comes up in almost every forum I'm in every day, whether it's constituent concerns or concerns even from staff, concerns that I've received from council, agency issues. Again, it comes up in any number of ways.
I appreciate that. It comes up in complaints, but
Right.
by way of having a sense for where we should be and knowing whether or not we're meeting that standard or not, do we have any regular opportunity to make sure that we're always on track?
So one, we're doing a permit stat, which I spoke of a bit earlier, but in addition, permitting has come up in any number of our stats, which is why it is now getting its own stat. So it has come up in our neighborhood sub-cabinet, where we're bringing in agencies around specific neighborhood level issues. It has come up there as far as the rationale for why projects haven't moved along as quickly. And it's come up in any number of our forums outcomes. And so, again, that is why we are now doing this permit stat. I think what you will see when we do our agency performance plans is that we will have metrics around permitting timelines, for example. And through the regular reporting from the agencies, we would be able to look at their metrics to determine that there is an issue that we need to dig in deeper on. But again, this one in particular is rising to the level of a stat.
And for my own edification, the performance plans and reviews, you're suggesting that'll happen probably around quarterly?
Yes. So at where we are in the process is in August, we will roll out the first tranche. I think it's the first 15, if I'm not mistaken, agency performance plans, and those plans will be made public. And then those agencies will be.
And for those plans, are we looking at all responsibilities of a given agency, or are we just looking at sort of priorities of the administration and things that we want to see happen by way of goals of the administration? So for instance, let's say we want to host more special events, and that is a goal and a priority of the administration. And so we start targeting special events. It's in DOT's plan, and so we start tracking how many permits and special events we host. That might be something we have there. But it might not necessarily capture the other day-to-day responsibilities of DOT, such as streetlights being on or being fixed.
So the
you see
performance
what I mean?
plan, yeah. So I want to differentiate between these different tools, right?
Okay.
So the mayor's action plan is the tool by which we are really looking at the broader kind of strategy and the administration-wide goals. What
Right.
we are doing with agency performance plans is really focusing on the core mission and services of the agency, because those things may or may not be captured in the mayor's action plan. So with these agency performance plans, it is, and some of the mayor's priorities may be captured in agency performance plans, but it is really getting at what is the core mission of that agency, what are the core services that they provide that we need to be tracking. That is what's going to be in the agency performance plans.
Okay, so that's helpful to know. So we're saying these performance plans will effectively be like a health assessment of an agency. DGS, for instance, is responsible for buildings and fleet and so on and so forth, and these are the things that are relevant to buildings, fleet, and otherwise. And we're going to track for DGS all those things, and that would be in their performance plan.
Yes.
Okay. And then as far as regular check-ins, how would DGS know what's going on? We're going to go with DGS, for instance, because Director Attila's here. So, how would we regularly check in with DGS on its progress? Is that something that we're counting on DGS to do, biweekly, monthly, otherwise, or is that something that your
So we
office
would do that. So in this case, DGS reports to the Deputy City Administrator. And so in the Deputy City Administrator has regular check-ins and syncs with the leadership of DGS and all of the agencies within her portfolio. And in addition to just regular check-ins, there are also strategy sessions as well with the agencies. And so now that we have this agency performance planning tool, that is another resource for that executive to leverage in their management and oversight of DGS.
So the Deputy CEO would, in her meetings, have data for which she is going through every month
She'll have
or every
access to
week?
that.
Access, or would she come to the meetings with data?
Well, one, I think I am not going to require that the executive, at every check-in.
Sure, I appreciate that.
Right, but that is again, it's a tool, and we can encourage, especially as we are going into this performance planning process, to do kind of that regular sync. The other piece of this that I do want to introduce, and I don't want to overwhelm us with too many concepts, but my predecessor did bring this TMO management approach, this transformation management approach to government. And that work is being led by Ari Giles on our team. And so through that approach, we're actually bringing all of the agencies together, and this is around the mayor's action plan, and that work happens monthly. We've moved to a quarterly reporting kind of schedule on on the mayor's action plan, because we don't want to overwhelm our agencies, right? Like,
Yeah,
it's a lot of work that goes into the performance management process, but we have this TMO executive steering committee. We have regular syncs with the agencies around the mayor's action plan, and we actually now are rolling out this new T-Hub, which is the transformation hub, where agencies, it'll be our performance hub, where you can go in and input all of your performance data into one centralized tool.
Yeah. I think there are sort of, in my mind, two different paths for performance management, one being large goals that you're trying to accomplish, and then the day-to-day work. And DGS is a great example of this because DGS manages our fleet. And so the regular availability of vehicles would be a huge, huge, huge lever for other agencies to do their basic work. So if DGS can't keep vehicles on the road, we can't do other stuff, trash, potholes, you name it, police officers. So I think those two pieces are related but still separate. And I think I'm really curious, and we've had this conversation or parts of it in different forums, how we're going to regularly stay on top of that component. There is this sort of overarching goals, big problems that we're resolving, things we're working towards set by the administration, and then making sure we have vehicles on the streets, making sure that we're filling positions, HR. So I think those two pieces are related but separate.
So I think with that, and again, talking about another tool here, through our chief data officer, we actually are developing an executive dashboard where we can look at things like availability of fleet or, hiring, or the number of officers that are actively available, or, violent crime indexes, which we currently already get on a daily basis. So again, I think there are different tools for us to be able to monitor and track some of those things. And even our own internal dashboard for the mayor and myself are different ways that we can just look very quickly at data that's in front of us and say, hey, there's an issue, only 40% of DPW's vehicles are available. That's going to cause us a trash collection issue if we don't jump on top of it. So I think that's another tool that we're leveraging to look at some of those everyday service delivery areas.
Yeah, and I'll close here. I think that's one of the things I would really look forward to working with you on, making sure that we have our way of doing it so that everyone understands where those questions will be asked and how we're looking at that data so that we're all working from the same sheet of music.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Before we get to Councilman Stokes, quick housekeeping items, CAO Leach. All the stuff for ARPA that we've requested, we're going to ask that be submitted by 6/2 prior to the ARPA hearing at 6 p.m. when we reconvene. And then on the process improvement prioritization list, as well as the HR-related interagency working group outcomes, is June 7th a reasonable deadline for those, for you all?
Yes, I have to talk to my partners at Hopkins, but I will tell them that is the deadline.
We'll put
because they are developing that for me. But
yeah,
yes.
and your team has access to our spreadsheet, so we'll put 6/7 for now, and
Yep, that works.
wait to hear back from you if otherwise. Councilman Stokes?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. CAO,
Yes.
I just have a question. A little while ago, I called for a hearing 23-1179. As you know, we have internet problem. Low-income residents do not have access to internet. So HABC has like $15 million to install internet service to low income. I've been trying to have 2 meetings, and they got canceled twice. And I think this is important that low-income people have access to the internet, and it has not happened, and it's a little frustrating. So to you, can you pull them together so we can make that happen? Because HABC is just sitting on $15 million, and now low-income people don't have access to the internet, and that should be our priority.
Yes, absolutely. And we will work with our Office of Broadband and Digital Equity within BSIT, and they will join that meeting as well. So we will help coordinate that meeting with HABC.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. President?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam CAO,
Yes.
I guess going back to the vacancies again, and again, this common theme of us creating new positions in agencies that already have a significant amount of vacants. So just real quick, just one small snapshot is even in the mayoralty section where I think there's 22 vacant positions, which is 26% of, accounts for 26% of all the positions that are assigned, and about $2.8 million. But under the current fiscal 24 budget, we're looking to create 13 positions in the Office of Infrastructure. I'm a fan of the Office of Infrastructure, by the way. Creating 2 positions in the Office of LGBTQ. Again, I think there's significant work that we need to do there, so definitely supportive and understanding we need positions there. Creates 2 positions in the Office of Economic Development to support the Deputy Mayor for Communications and Economic Development. So just there alone, we want to create a total of 17 new positions on top of 22 vacant positions, I believe. Not talking about that specifically, but just on a broader scale, we're seeing that across the board throughout the budget where we want to create positions in agencies that have vacancies. When you drill down on the information further, and thank you for helping us get here and providing the information, some of these jobs have been vacant for a very long time. For instance, 189 positions have been vacant for more than 24 months. Of which more than a quarter are in Department of Transportation. So 2-part question. 1, just the overall strategy of trying to fill particularly some of these aging vacancies. And then 2, the strategy of identifying real needs and priorities in the administration and not leveraging existing vacancies to kind of fill those roles, particularly vacancies that have been out there for almost as long as we've been kind of in this term. As opposed to creating new positions that tie into new money.
Yep. So thank you for that question. So I think there are a few things that we should unpack when it comes to our vacancies. One, when it comes to our operational business units, we have daily minimum staffing requirements that we really should be adhering to. And unfortunately, in too many of our operational agencies, like a DOT and or like a DPW, we are not meeting our daily minimum requirements for staffing. So 1, as we think about how we actually stabilize, maintain, and even grow our service delivery, we actually need those people in those positions in order to get there. So that's one thought around why we would add positions to agencies that currently have vacancies, is because we actually need even more positions because we don't even have enough positions in what we currently have in those agencies to provide the services based off of what industry standards requires. So that's one piece of this. When it comes to the mayoralty, I think we all realize and know that there are different functions within the mayoralty. So for example, you mentioned the LGBTQ Affairs Office, there's the Mayor's Office of African American Male Engagement, right? The Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. So there are all of these different entities. And so by taking positions from, for example, we wouldn't take a position from MEMA to fill a staffing position in the direct mayor's office, nor would we take a position from MEMA to give to LGBTQ affairs, because again, those positions are connected to and really are required as a part of the functioning of that office. If we were to take positions from individual offices to start new offices, again, it's the, we're robbing Peter to pay Paul when we're not fully staffed in the way that we should be. And so that is why there may be vacancies, but we will still add additional positions versus taking away from other agencies who also need those positions as well.
Totally understand. I mean, obviously, the skill set of someone maybe in the LGBTQ office is different than the skill set in another office. Totally understand that. But I guess on a broader scale, when you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of positions, throughout agencies, right? Some agencies with a couple hundred by themselves. The idea is the pins are out there, and when you further drill down and you see these positions haven't been filled in over 2 years, the reality that we're going to fill them this year in this budget, just I haven't seen a plan that provides me confidence that we'll be able to do so.
So so to that point, and Laura, correct me if I'm wrong, this is a test of my knowledge here, I would venture to say less than 1%, but I'll say less than 5% of our positions have been vacant for longer than 2 years. Is that accurate, Laura?
That is correct.
I said 200, it's 189
Yep.
out of 1,000 and,
About 1,800.
out of 100, 1,241.
Yep. So to
So
that
about
point.
10%.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, no, I'm not sure that is 10%. I think the number that we had was what, 1,800?
I have 100,
The general fund number as of, based off of the data we had, the general fund number based off of May 1st was 1810.
yeah,
was
okay.
the vacant.
I actually have 1,761, so it's a little bit higher. And for jobs that have been vacant for over 2 years, I have 189 positions. So again, we don't have to go back and forth the number.
Okay, right.
It's a big number. I guess the concern I have is like to realistically expect the administration to develop a plan to kind of fill those jobs, particularly the jobs we haven't filled in 2 years, over the course of this next year without a real plan today is concerning. So when we talk about like creating new positions, new funded positions all across the board, it seems like the first place we would go would be positions where we have vacancies. And, you know, maybe reclassify, maybe freeze some, like come up with an overall HR strategy there and leverage that money. This is kind of getting back to my ARPA question, leverage that money in a way where it could really, you know, result in some return on investment.
So I think, again, there's a lot to unpack there. So one, I think to even balance this budget, we had to freeze positions, right? So that is how we were able to, I think, identify 5 million, maybe slightly more, of our budget gap was by freezing positions. We also have, for example, made the strategic decision within the Department of Parks and Recreation to freeze a number of positions there so that we can provide pay increases for the staff, because that will help with retention and recruitment, because we keep, for example, they'll tell you the exact numbers, but we've lost over a dozen of our Rec and Parks employees to Baltimore County because one of our rec leaders went to Baltimore County and recruited a number of our staff, right? Because the pay is just more competitive. So we are making some of those strategic decisions of being able to freeze positions so that we can raise pay. Because a big challenge that we are having when it comes to our recruitment is our competitiveness. Oftentimes when we're competitive on the early side of the pay scale, but by the time we get to the middle of the pay scale, like we're not as competitive, right, after the first or second year. One of the things that we have done and we're actively doing, and DHR will go into more details about it, is that we are doing an assessment of our pay scale and our pay system and our compensation strategy, right? When what you see in other jurisdictions is that there is a pay scale schedule where there are different steps, right? There may be 12 or 13 steps in a particular classification, and there are opportunities for employees to receive additional pay and move up the rung. Right now, essentially, employees are receiving COLAs, and that's about it, right? And so a part of the strategy that we have is we've worked with this outside consultant who has done an assessment of our system to determine how we might be able to implement this step schedule within the city of Baltimore, and we would have to do it over a phased approach, but by providing those higher salaries, that will make us more competitive so that we can recruit and retain more of our talent. Also, and DHR will talk more about what they'll talk more about our retention and our recruitment strategy, but we've seen, for example, for some of our hard to hire positions and our hard to fill positions, with CDL drivers, for example, the $10,000 incentive, right? We had to do something because we just could not recruit CDL drivers into the city of Baltimore because they could go and get 20 plus $1,000 by going into the private sector. When you talk about police recruitment, right, the same thing is happening where you have jurisdictions that are putting out $25,000 bonuses. And so we are having to get creative about how we recruit employees to the city of Baltimore, and we are doing the hard work of figuring out what that looks like on a large scale. Now, when it comes to recruitment of the current positions that we have now, we just had a hiring event, and forgive me for not remembering all of the numbers. I have them in my notes somewhere, but we had over 1,000 people at War Memorial last week, right? There are people in the city of Baltimore that want to work for the city of Baltimore. And so this goes to the conversation that, Councilwoman Ramos just raised a little bit earlier about our systems being able to move quickly and being able to onboard quickly. And we have had some success. At that event, we actually did on-the-spot job offers for a number of agencies. Again, I forget the number of on-the-spot job offers, but we have the ability now to do on-the-spot job offers. DPW had a number of recruitment fairs recently. I mean, they are seeing like 60 offers at one job fair because they're seeing 200 and 300 people to show up. I think Councilmember Stokes had one in his district, for example. And so we're putting boots on the ground to fill these positions. And again, what we are hearing from the citizens of Baltimore is they want to work for the city of Baltimore. They just need to get their foot in the door. And so that's why we're working on our HR processes so that we can move people into positions faster.
Yeah, so I think, I totally agree with all of that, particularly as it relates to strategy and developing the tools around recruitment and retention. I guess the concern that I still share, we'll like to continue to kind of further the discussion is, again, for some of our jobs that have been in place for over 2 years, some in upwards of close to 3 years that have been vacant, the reality is, will we be able to fill them in this budget? And if there is not a plan in place to do so, if we don't feel like we're going to do so, particularly in a tight budget that we're in right now, the money really should be reallocated to go after and fix up some of the infrastructure, some of the one-time system costs, some of the problems that have been raised that will continue to be talked about over the course of this next couple of weeks, as opposed to just sitting there idly standing by while we're also creating new positions in the same agencies. Fundamentally, that is just where the concern is, and definitely interested in trying to understand the big picture and the overall plan, as you guys have evaluated this and decided to try to implement new jobs.
And so I'll talk very broadly, and BBMR may want to jump in a little bit as well. Traditionally, we have not leveraged personnel dollars for example, capital costs, for example,
not capital. No capital.
Okay,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes, and or programmatic things. So for example, the direction that we generally give our agencies is that they could carry forward, let's talk about Parks and Rec. So we generally tell our agencies that they may be able to carry forward any vacancy savings from rec programming, right? But it has to stay within that line or that classification. We usually don't move money across kind of budget lines, if you will. But I hear your point about being able to identify and leverage vacancy savings to do some of the things that you and I have talked about. And I think we are open to that, and we'll definitely be looking at that for this year. And we can talk about some of the things that we want to see done with some of our vacancy savings.
Understood. And I mean, just like going down the pathway of the bonding capacity increase, and identifying ways to save or entrepreneurial ways of creating new revenue, as it relates to that bonding capacity, is the same thing we're talking about with like these vacant positions. I mean, I've sat in this council chambers as a member of this council since 2011, in 2012, and every year it's the same thing as it relates to the number of jobs. I think that with the Great Migration or whatever it was called through the pandemic, it's been exacerbated, and we're seeing numbers of upwards of close to 2,000 vacants at one particular time. But I think because of the time that we're in, now it's time to do something different, right? And, that's just what I'm calling on leading on the administration, particularly when we're talking about jobs that have been vacant for close to 3 years, over 2 years, over a year, or 18 months. I mean, and we're talking about real dollars as it relates to the impact that we have with Kerwin. We've heard that several times today. I think that we can be just much more creative as it relates to dispersing our money in a way to directly go to the critical needs that we have in front of us.
Yep. So what I will offer is that even before becoming CAO, I started my career as a budget analyst, and I recall in working with some of my agencies, Rec and Parks in particular, and the Health Department, and they talked to me about how, in my mind, when they would talk to me about challenges with their budget, but I would see substantial vacancy savings that didn't align for me. And so, I've been an advocate and proponent of us leveraging vacancy savings in carry forward to be able to solve and address some of the financial challenges that our agencies have. And I've seen more flexibility out of BBMR over the past, I would say, maybe 1 to 2 fiscal years around allowing the agencies to carry forward their dollars to do some of those things.
We appreciate that. We just don't want these to become supplementals.
Yes. Got you.
CAO Leach, have we relaxed marijuana screening as like a disqualifying factor for our non-first responder and driver jobs? I believe we have, but I just refresh my memory.
Let me double check. I want to confirm and not share bad information.
So basically the question is for non-first responder and non-vehicle operator jobs, is a positive marijuana testing screen still a disqualifying factor?
Yeah.
Nate, Sophia, you guys got that? And if you could get back to us on that one by 6/2, please and thank you. Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe I asked that same question last year, and I think we do have some classifications that the requirements were relaxed.
Yes, there were
so,
classifications.
yeah.
I just want to make sure that, I just want to confirm.
Right. So my question goes to what we had a lengthy conversation about just earlier in the day about revenue generating. That seems to be one of the groups that I know from finance should spearhead, but also like that should come from your office as well. I mean, we got to figure out how to get more money to do the work that we need to do. So I think you had heard the discussion that we had about, making sure that we're trying to figure out the best way to, whether it's through savings, whether it's through, we're not going to raise taxes, but we've got to be much more creative. So I just wanted to put that also on your radar for your first 180-day initiatives.
So a thing that a couple members of this body have heard me talk about is that we are embarking upon an update to our 10-year financial plan. And so what we're going to do through that 10-year financial planning process is really disassemble our budget and really understand our needs. So, I mean, we've heard a number of needs, especially around our deferred maintenance, for example. We have billions of dollars in deferred maintenance costs. And although we may not be able to address them in 1 or 2 years, we still need to understand the challenge that's in front of us and develop a strategy to really tackle that issue, especially as we have funding from IIJA and ARPA, excuse me, and other investments coming into the city. And so this 10-year financial plan will be our opportunity to look at how we generate additional revenue. Excuse me.
We'll give you a chance to, I know. You've been talking all day, it's okay.
Talking for 3 hours isn't easy.
Right. No, that's fine. I think that, it's not just the capital side, but it's also just given what we just talked about the, increases in pay that will get us to be able to get what we need in terms of folks to work for us, too. So it sounds like you're going to move in that direction with the 10-year plan. When can we expect that?
So we'll embark upon that work this summer, and it's going to probably take us a couple of months to complete. But we hope to partner with the council on that.
Okay, so there will be some discussions with us about that piece, for sure. Okay.
Yeah, and I've also mentioned this to our partners at the state as well. So I think there are a number of stakeholders that really will be a part or will be interested in us in our 10-year financial plan.
And then during the, this is a request, during the finances presentation last week, we weren't taking requests, so I want to just reiterate my other request that I had, which was there was a page in that presentation that had the top 23 office or services that had, or classifications that had vacancies. And so just to make sure that it gets, Mr. Chair, in the record about that we wanted to see kind of all of those, and also by agency as well.
Yep, we're working on pulling that together and should have it for you guys very soon.
Okay, great. I don't think it got into the official record, so I just wanted to make sure that that was the case. Yes, Mr. Chair?
Oh, no.
Got it, okay.
Yep, we're good.
Cool, and then.
Nate, Sophia, you got that? That was from Thursday's hearing?
Great. Following up on that, could you let us know where we are on procurement reform? Your predecessor had said that there was an assessment happening. We never got the results of that assessment, as far as I know. And then, what the plan is moving forward. I think, obviously we have several issues with procurement. I mean, one is, minority business contracting. Two is that we continue to see multiple change orders because we take lowest bid as opposed to best value. My folks who are working on all of the things that we're working on in my district shouldn't be waiting a year to be able to put a contract out to bid for redoing 4 alleys. What are we looking at in terms of time frame?
Yep, thank you for that question. So we have been working with a consultant, Civic Innovators, to develop our procurement reform roadmap. And so I think that they are nearing the end of their assessment. Once we get that information and we're able to really understand the recommendations, then we'll start to, of course, brief the council president and the comptroller, who I think we briefed at the start of the process about the recommendations coming in. Also, and again, I want to actually formally extend my apologies around the procurement director announcement, but we do have a new director of procurement that's going to be coming in. And just an aside, we actually stole him from Prince William County, Virginia, where my predecessor is. So we got him back.
I know, we're good? Councilman Stokes, and then we're going to go to Councilman Cohen.
I think this is for CEO. Maybe Ms. Lawson, you can answer this question. Can you give us how many positions, how many jobs you have over in the permit department, and how many emails you get a day for permits?
So when you say permit office, are you referencing within
Housing.
So within housing, in their service 751, building and zoning inspections and permits, as of May 1st, they had 16 vacant positions.
And how many employees you have to handle those permits? I believe it might be 8 people, 8 employees, if I'm correct.
There are 75 total positions in that service.
So I'm just talking about the permit process, not, because from my understanding, you receive a lot of permits for housing. It might be in a month, maybe 4,000, but you got 8 employees. And then we get calls about somebody that's doing development. They can't get access to the permits. They about to go out of business. I send an email and they say, oh, here go the permit. Let me send it to them. So what are we doing in terms of making sure we have enough employees over there to handle the amount of permits that we getting here, just dealing with the housing issues?
I know that Commissioner Kennedy will be able to speak to housing's plan during the housing hearing, but I can say in the conversations that I've had with Commissioner Kennedy as we go into fiscal '24 and the vacancies in the housing department, that she has a very aggressive strategy to put to get all of the positions into recruitment. Many of the positions currently are in recruitment. And so I do know that getting to a higher staffing level in housing is one of their very top goals as we go into fiscal '24.
And the other question is, I know Council President was talking about positions that have not been filled. In the budget, you're looking for, I guess, over 30 new DPW positions, and we have not filled the DPW positions yet. My question is, what positions are you, what the 30 over positions you have in the budget, what positions are they for? Because if we haven't filled them in DPW, I had a job fair, Chickware, everybody had a job fair, but we still in the budget asking for additional DPW.
Yep, so I think this goes back to my point around daily minimum staffing requirements and industry standards. And in solid waste in particular, and DPW will be able to articulate this better than I, in solid waste in particular, we are well outside of industry standards for the number of routes that our employees have to do daily, as well as the length of time for their shifts. And so what the positions that you see in the DPW budget are about actually stabilizing our solid waste services. When you look at solid waste in particular, their vacancy rate is around 11%. It's 11.7%, which is actually not that bad. It is better than the enterprise-wide vacancy rate that we currently see. When you double-click into what those positions are in solid waste, where there are vacancies, there are less vacancies, I would say, and Laura might have the specific number. It may be 20 if I'm not mistaken, but in recycling. So we actually budget staffing by service within DPW. So solid waste actually does not have a very high vacancy rate within DPW.
So my question is, I know Director Mitchell was kind of surprised that when he came on, we really didn't know that our DPW workers, some of the trucks didn't even have air conditioning on them. Yep. That's awful. So are we looking at when these young men and women, when they get off from work, they don't have a shower. They actually taking the trash and them germs home to their family. So we talking about getting an air conditioner for trucks, but what about building that? Because, that's a morale problem for your employees if they come to work and come back, and if they don't change their clothes, they taking all that home with them.
Yep. No, I've actually heard that myself directly from some of our laborers and our DPW staff, and that is definitely something that we're looking into and working on, is really improving their facilities and providing those things like showers. And so DPW will be able to talk specifically about the timeline for some of that work. But we are investing in everything from new vehicles, which you'll hear more about, I'm sure, during the DPW and DGS hearing. So not only are we saying we need new staff, we also need new and more modern vehicles. We need better routing software, right? So we're really modernizing our solid waste division and our solid waste work. And a part of that is also improving our facilities, and a portion of the ARPA allotment is going towards DPW facilities.
Well, I just want to put it on the radar because it's so important for our employees to feel like, the morale cannot be that good when you can't just, take care of yourself after you get off from work. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam CAO. I'm going to advocate for city council staffs, which I believe are underpaid as we look at comparative places across our state and across the country. I know that in Montgomery County, city council members' chief of staff will make between $100,000 to $180,000. My chief of staff, who is phenomenal and has I think 15 years of leadership experience in the private sector makes $71,000. If we want really great people to come and work here in city government, we need to pay them accordingly. So I wonder if there's been any assessment recently, and if there could be an assessment on city council staff and the way that we pay the folks that work for us.
Yep, so the council president actually did request, I think, and I don't recall if it was last year or the prior year's budget cycle, a city council staffing assessment. And in the document that I sent to the council yesterday, we outlined kind of where we are with that, and it's more than just pay, it's really around the structure, I think, and the number of staff within the council. And so what we have done and what we will partner to do is we've done just a quick assessment and reached out to ICMA, the National League of Cities, and some of those organizations to see what research they have that exists around other city councils to just compare where we are to where other jurisdictions are. And I think, we'll be working with the council president's office on determining what the next step should be, right? Whether we bring on a consultant or, we will have this discussion with members of this body and make recommendations around staffing.
That's great, because again, I think that we absolutely have to do better by the folks that work for us. And again, not to overly reference, because they do have more people, but in Montgomery County, it's $500,000 per office to spend on staff, and that is, again, substantially more than we have here. And ours probably work a lot harder in some cases and deal with a lot more stress, and so it's important and appreciate that collaboration. My second question has to do with, similar to what Councilman Stokes was asking, but just around safety within our facilities. We've heard a lot lately from Cub and other folks about just a lack of safety protocols within city agencies. Specifically, sanitation in the Department of Public Works has been referenced, but really across the board. They came out with a report pretty recently saying that there's some real deep challenges around workforce safety. And, you always start your testimony by thanking the workers of city government, which I think is right on. But I think that it is critically important that we respect them enough to protect them and have basic safety protocols in place in every city agency. So wanted to get a sense of where we are in terms of improving safety of whether it's the folks who ride the trucks in sanitation, whether it's folks that are working in the wastewater treatment plants, where we are in terms of making improvements on safety protocols.
Thank you for that. And let me start with, I couldn't agree with you more that it should be and is our top priority to ensure that the employees of the Baltimore City government are safe in their work environment. So that is absolutely a top priority of mine. I think this is something that was raised by our labor commissioner, and in her conversations with many of the unions, this safety issue has come up. And of course, we've heard about the report, and I've heard directly from employees when I've gone out around some of their safety concerns. And what I will say is there's an opportunity to talk with DPW in particular about their safety protocols, but this is an enterprise-wide issue that I will be working on and coordinating at the city administrator's level to ensure that, one, especially around OSHA, that we are in compliance and we're doing all that we can to keep our employees safe. So you have my commitment to tackle and make some recommendations around safety protocols for employees. So we'll be, I can commit to doing an assessment of what currently exists and is in place, and identifying where we need some improvements.
That's great and very much appreciated. Could we get a timeline on when that can occur and when the council can see it?
Sure. What I will say offhand is Q1 of fiscal year 2024.
24. Okay. Okay. I'd like to make that a formal request for the committee.
Nate, Sophia, you got that? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. CAO Leach, one of the things that I've raised to you is concerns with the increase in certain salaries, and specifically within the mayor's office. In the fiscal year 21 budget, mayor's office salary was a sum total of $11.4 million at 76 positions. In this budget, it has ballooned to $17.1 million at 103 positions, which is an increase of approximately 51%, which is significant to say the least, and somewhat frustrating to talk about, especially following the comments from my colleague from the 1st District. We are consistently being asked to support increased salaries, whether it's through ordinance or through approval of the budget, and these are significant increases, right? And I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about this increase, specifically in the mayor's office, and what we as a city are getting in return for that.
Yep. So a couple of things. I think very similar to your colleagues' comments about the pay of city council staff. We also have to be competitive when it comes to recruiting top-tier talent in the mayor's office. My predecessor is in Prince Williams County, and he makes $100,000 more than I do, for example, right? Like, just setting, for comparison's sake, how we compare to other jurisdictions, even with salaries in the mayor's office. But to address the increase that we're seeing specifically, there are a couple of things, and I think that some of that is detailed in the budget book, some of it may not be. So within the Office of Infrastructure Development that we've established, we are bringing on 13 positions, and those positions are going to be project manager level positions and require a project manager level salary. I'll allow the director during his time to talk specifically about the roles and responsibilities of the folks in that agency and why they require a six-figure salary in order to manage some of these large-scale capital projects. In addition, we did add, so that was 13 positions. We also talked about the LGBTQ office and additional positions that are coming in there to support that work, as well as the Mayor's Office of African American Male Engagement. A lot of this, well, those positions in particular were a part of cleanup, meaning at one time the Mayor's Office of African American Male Engagement was combined with the Mayor's Office of Children and Family Success, and we are now kind of cleaning up those pins, and you'll actually see in the Mayor's Office of Children and Family Success a decent size increase in their pins, but a part of that is because of grant-funded positions and also positions that came over from the Mayor's Office of African American Male Engagement. So again, the positions that we're seeing and the salary increases that we are seeing are because of some of these changes. But again, I think, you know, at the level, again, for infrastructure development, for example, those positions require, if we want to recruit talented people to manage large-scale infrastructure projects for the city of Baltimore, we're going to have to pay them over $100,000 to do it.
I appreciate that. Is there a similar analysis or evaluation for mayor's office staff that you've conducted that syncs with the analysis that was being conducted for council staff that you referenced earlier?
So no, we haven't done a formal assessment. I can check with DHR to see the last time they did a salary study for the mayor's office. But just off of, I can just tell you, based off of my own experience, having worked in other mayor's offices, that we are, in some cases, we're more competitive than in other cases. But I can follow up on that, and are you asking for an assessment of mayor's office salaries?
I'm just curious if one has been completed.
So I'll check with DHR to see if they've done one, but I have not been a part of one.
Okay. I'll leave this topic on this note. In 2017, I negotiated an increase for city council staff office salaries, or for our budgets. And we increased that from about $290,000 to $335,000. That covers salary and fringe for a council member, and at the time it was 2.5 staff. And council members' offices have struggled with their ability to apportion that appropriation as they see fit, within reasonable guidelines, whether it's the consolidation of 2 part-time employee pins into 1 full-time employee pin. And it's very frustrating to see salary increases of $50,000 at a time, which have become commonplace during this administration, when we struggle to pay the people that work for us and support us as duly elected officials. And I would hope that your attention would go to ensuring that that analysis of council staff salaries is given the same consideration and the same sense of urgency as when we're asked to be supportive of these types of increases.
Yep. So thank you for that, and I received that, and we can continue conversations around, how we can be supportive of the council. What I would say is I'm not sure that there are particular. Are you suggesting that there are particular positions that have seen increases of 50K?
I have a woman who is who's a number 1 in my office, who's retired, who is a C-suite level executive with like 20 plus years professional experience, has served in a variety of community engagement capacities as a volunteer over the years, is more qualified than any staff member that I've ever had. And I'm told by DHR that she can't make more than $62,000 a year. And we have, again, commonplace in this administration where individuals are being hired and making $50,000+ more than their predecessor.
Got it.
And that is not an acceptable, that's not okay, and that's what I'm raising to your attention. And I think having your direct attention on that issue as the CAO for our city and understanding the frustration from the council's perspective could really help move the needle in the right way, and that we're given a certain amount of funding in our budget, we should be able to spend that funding within the guidelines of the law responsibly, but as we see fit as the head of our own agencies, if that makes sense.
Yep, I hear you.
I really appreciate that. Colleagues, I'm going to jump to an infrastructure question if there's no objections. Okay, great. What's that?
You wanted us to put off the conversation about the hotels to this hearing, so.
Yes. Well, okay, so CAO Leach, on behalf of the whole committee and council, I'm going to ask you to, if you could briefly talk about the hotel situation that we discussed, and then we'll jump into the infrastructure stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So regarding hotel acquisition, we are in active negotiation. So I won't be able to share too many details that could potentially compromise those active negotiations, but I can provide you with a little bit of background. So one, I'd like to start with the timeline for the purchase of hotels. So it's been said that there has been a delay in the purchase of hotels. That is inaccurate. There has not been a delay in the purchase of hotels. It was always our strategy to, again, I talked about FIFO. It's first in, first out. A part of the strategy is leveraging funds that we currently have available to us through the federal government to pay for the current hotel contracts that we have. So we still have active hotel contracts. And so we were using CARES Act dollars and ensuring that we spent every dime of our CARES Act dollars by paying for the costs associated with hotels. And then also, up until the emergency ended, we were able to get FEMA reimbursement for those hotels. It would not have been fiscally prudent for us to allow free money to go to waste. And so for us, now that the emergency has ended, we've already been in active conversation and active negotiations for the purchase of hotels. What I will also say about the hotels and what we are grappling with around hotels is that our commercial real estate market has drastically changed post the pandemic. And so the values of these facilities prior to the pandemic is not the value that they are right now. And so that is a challenge that we are having to negotiate or deal with or navigate as it relates to the hotel purchase. Earlier, you asked about whether there will be one hotel or there will be two hotels. What I will offer is that that will be dictated by, one, the availability of resources and the cost of the actual hotels themselves. But my hope is to not actually keep hotels on the city's books for an extended period of time. And I want to share a little bit more about my thinking there. I think, one, there are going to be significant costs, I think, with maintaining those hotels, and we've been working closely with DGS, and they've been a part of our working group so that we can understand the fiscal impact long-term for the purchase of these facilities. Also, I think that there are partners, community-based partners, who potentially could help us manage and or take on some of these hotel costs, right? We have been looking at potentially turning the hotels into permanent supportive housing after a couple of years. For example, we've been exploring conversations around medical respite and a step-down approach in our care system and leveraging hotels for that. So this isn't just about moving quickly to purchase two hotels for individuals experiencing homelessness. This is about looking at our overall strategy for shelter, for housing, for individuals experiencing homelessness, and deciding a long-term plan. So initially, the hotels might serve as just shelter, but long-term, I want to build a long-term strategy where we look at things like turning them into permanent supportive housing, medical respite, or partnering with a nonprofit partner to take on the day-to-day management and potential ownership of those facilities.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up question.
Directly related? Go.
Yeah, directly related to this. So I appreciate that, but I also, there is a significant need for non-congregate shelter ASAP, and there is a significant need for permanent supportive housing, and there's a significant need for all of the other things. And I understand that the city probably doesn't want to maintain the operating costs of having the non-congregate shelters, but it was the right decision to have a non-congregate shelter for COVID. It was the right decision, okay? What that has done is also said to folks that they no longer want to go into congregate shelter, okay? I don't think a lot of people want to go into congregate shelter, okay? So and I actually don't think, I mean, it's that people have talked about it being unsafe, particularly women, particularly older women. I mean, that's just not an environment that we should have, so that the hotels would provide that kind of environment, at least to be able to get settled, get the services, and then be able to go into permanent housing. I don't remember at all during the initial discussions around this that there would be just temporary hotels for non-congregate shelter, and then they would be turned into something else. I mean, I know you're sort of looking at all things at the moment, but I think we need to take these, the fact is that we have a pretty substantial crisis. We need to make sure that folks are stably housed, at least to be well, and then be able to get into permanent housing, and not having them. We just have to have we're going to have to figure this out, because we do have needs for permanent housing as well. We have to do all of it, and not just the shelters then turn into permanent for supportive. You know, we need to, I feel like the
Councilwoman, can you get to the question? Please.
well, that's my question, is that there's got to be a way to make sure that, I just don't think that the hotel situation is going to be a temporary situation. I think it's going to be a long-term situation, that then we look at, you know, continuing to look at all of the other options for supportive housing. So I guess we just need to have a longer conversation about what this looks like. But it was never the intent, I think, of us who had been talking about this for a long time, that the non-congregate shelter would be for just a year, and then we would, you know what I mean?
So I'm not suggesting that it would be for a year. What I'm suggesting is, one, and I'm not committing that this will turn into PSH, right? What I am suggesting is that we are taking a comprehensive look at the purchase of hotels and looking long-term about at how we maintain those hotels, and also looking at partnerships and other options. And so an option that has been floated, but that would be medium-term, 5-10 years from now, would be permanent supportive housing, right? So we know that we need non-congregate shelters in our system, and that is what we have committed to doing, and that is what we are going to do. When the Director of Homeless Services joins, she can talk more about the comprehensive strategy and the work that she's also doing with the Department of Housing and Community Development, because the two agencies are pretty joined at the hip, because we know the way to end homelessness is through housing. So she can talk a bit more about the strategy, but you have my commitment that these shelters are not just going to be for a year, that they will be a part of our system for some time.
And do we have a timeline as to when we might be seeing?
When we can close a real estate deal.
Oh, so we're at that stage. Oh, okay. That's actually closer than I thought. Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for indulging.
Thank you. Councilman Stokes? And then we'll get into infrastructure.
CEO, I just want to mention that we talk about the hotel business in terms of housing. I sit on the continuing care board, but nobody talk about how do they take a shower, how do they go to the bathroom. And the guy, Rich from Generosity Global had to leave because he couldn't get no more funding. That program worked over here about healthcare for the homeless for 3 years. Until we get into that part of having homeless people be into the hotel, why are we not recruiting more companies like Rich have to make sure, because you know, that give them dignity, one. 5 of them got hired for jobs. They gave out their clothes. And I understand that everybody want to feed people, but when they got to use the bathroom and that's not available to them, we get the calls about where they go at and do that. So my question is, why aren't we reaching back out to Mr. Rich and other companies that provide that service for homeless people until they get into some permanent housing?
Yep, thank you for that question. And the Director of Homeless Services can go into more details, but I am familiar with Generosity Global through the work with MOHS. And at one point, we had a proposal on the table to help them. I think it cost about $400,000 to help purchase a shower for Baltimore City, because it's my understanding that they operate outside of here in a surrounding jurisdiction or in a county, and they traveled into Baltimore City to provide the service. So I'll follow up with the Homeless Services Director to see where we are with those conversations with Generosity Global, but they have been a good partner to us.
So I guess I could actually mention my colleague, Chairman Costello. We were very instrumental in that happening over there, because I don't see that all over the city. You got one here, but you got homeless people all over the city. And how do we let somebody who provide a service to homeless people just leave? And he was over there for 3 years. DPW was very helpful in getting all that done. But we need to go back and revisit that until we find permanent houses for homeless people. We got to give them some dignity. And we're not doing that by letting a business like that provide that kind of service just leave because of a cost. It costs more to provide when you're talking about hotel permanent housing for them. Right now, they need that, and I don't see why we're not focusing on it also. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Ryer, thank you for joining us. Why don't you come take a seat at the party? Director Garbark, before we begin, if you could introduce your team. I know we got a lot of familiar faces from City Hall with you.
Yes, certainly. Good evening. Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, members of the committee, I'm Matt Garbark. I am the Director of the Mayor's Office of Infrastructure Development. I am joined by my team, Associate Director for Project Management, Tony Scott, Associate Director for Contracting and Capital Support, Andrew Ailshire, and Infrastructure Grants Manager, Ann Haskins-Brookover.
Thank you. One of my biggest complaints over the last 8.5 years has been the lack of utility work coordination. Matt, you and I have talked extensively about this virtually every month of the last 8 years. Can you talk to me about what this office can do to improve that situation, which has remained unacceptable?
Certainly. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, that's an area that a lot of folks have a lot of frustration over. Some of the work is obviously within city government, some of it's not, with BG&E, Veolia, Vicinity, the like. What we do, my office sits in on monthly meetings that are coordination meetings that are held where all of the different agencies and the utilities do come together. They talk about the projects that they are working on, that they're all working in the same area. There is a list or some sort of database or something where they look at all of that. Right now, we are involved in listening, working, convening, and talking to agencies. We are not in necessarily a role to direct or to sort of prioritize one over the other. What we end up doing is we will work with and then see if there are areas where we can combine efforts and try to work to get sort of a synergy on that right now.
So is that you, CAO Leach? Who's the person who's responsible for the coordination of utility work in the public right-of-way?
That would be, are you talking within the entire city or which agency or?
Yeah, within the entire city. So, for example, underneath any street could be DPW water, DPW sewer, DPW stormwater, Comcast, Verizon, AT&T, Vicinity Steam, BGE, and whatever else, broadband and whatever else is underneath the street. Who's responsible for coordinating work on any given street in the city?
So I don't want to speak out of turn, but from an operational side, I believe that would be the city administrator's office through the assistant city's administrator, is my understanding, I think. The operational side of directing and coordinating.
So making sure that they're synced up. So for example, we're doing a capital project to replace water mains, and that's programmed for next summer. Who's the person or the office who's responsible for reaching out to BGE to say, do you have gas mains or electronic transmission cables in this area that need to be upgraded? Oh, you have it planned out 5 years from now. We have it planned out 1 year from now. How do we get to the middle so we only unzip the street one time? Because remember that in DPW, we call them constituents,
Yes,
right?
Sir. Yes, sir.
DPW calls them customers.
Mm-hmm.
BGE calls them ratepayers.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't matter who it is. At the end of the day, it comes out of their pocket, the cost to do all this work.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be CAO's office?
Yep, so one, I think a lot of the coordination does happen at the agency level, but where my office comes into play is, when there are multiple agencies at play, right? So in the case where there's DOT, where you might have DOT, DPW, and BG&E, right? And we can help coordinate the agencies that are involved in a project. So again, I think the regular day-to-day coordination might happen at the DOT level, but when it is those cross kind of multiple agencies that are involved in a project, it will come up to my level and one of our ACAs who oversees operations and or the DCAO, and if necessary, me, will be involved in helping with coordination there.
I would proffer that the current structure is similar to the Federation in one of the Star Wars movies, and we need a strong dictatorship to control what is happening in our public right-of-way. And I think that you and your office are probably uniquely positioned to provide that. And I strongly believe there are tens of millions of dollars a year that are on the table that could be saved if your office or whomever you delegated, whether it was giving that authority to Matt or whomever else, were to lay a very heavy hand and hammer, especially on private sector entities that continue to operate in our public right of way.
Yes.
For your consideration,
I receive that.
CAO Leach. Thank you.
I receive it.
Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Real quick, Mr. Garbach, as it relates to, I guess, the jobs that'll be selected that you guys will be partaking in, is there a minimum requirement or some type of variables that you're going to use to determine what projects you leave versus what projects stay with the agencies?
Thank you for that question. Right now, nothing beyond looking at our CIP, our capital budget, and seeing which projects are actually using federal money, seeing where we're going to put that money, and looking at just sort of the complexity and the amount of interagency coordination that's required to deliver those projects. So that's sort of our first cut. We're building on that to align them with the mayor's pillars, as well as other areas to see where our efforts can best be utilized and leveraged to further those projects.
So source and use is a pretty big factor on
Yes,
whether
sir.
you keep it or. Are PMP requirements tied into any of the jobs that are under your discretion?
No, sir, not as they're written.
Not as
They
they're
are,
written.
they are encouraged, but not required.
Got you. Unifier, can you talk about Unifier real quick and go through that with us?
I certainly can, yes. That is a application that the Baltimore City Department of IT is working on to bring all of our operating agencies, their workflow systems into a single, essentially unified system so that they are all tracking projects, paying invoices, all of the data for the workflow, and all of that is being coordinated consistently. Right now, it's fragmented. Different agencies use different systems. Some are more sophisticated than others. That will allow the workflow management and the project management of the projects themselves to be aligned in a single system that can then be used to interface with Workday to actually pay the invoices and to actually get the general ledger all up to order and all of that.
So we don't have like a similar Workday situation. Is your leadership team, are they engaged in developing the specifications, the requirements, the deliverables associated with that on the front end?
Yes, sir. We are working closely with IT and all the agencies on that. Yes, sir.
I saw Director Carter here. He's not here longer. Could you provide us the schedule
Absolutely.
on development as well as delivery of that?
Absolutely.
And then the last question I have is, I guess, Green Book evaluation, going down that path. I know you guys were taking a quick snapshot of going over like internal regulations before we looked at the larger requirements associated with our external partners. Could you kind of just update the council on that?
Absolutely. Yes, sir. The city's manual on design specifications is called the Green Book. It was actually based on the state's, I think, similarly called the Gray Book, but it's about 1,000 pages of all the different design standards and specs for the city, ranging from how to design a bridge to how to design a building, all of this stuff. It has not been updated since 2006. In that time, we know engineering standards, construction standards have changed tremendously. One of the reasons our contracts are like 500 pages thick is because there has to be variances to all the standards and specs that no longer apply based on the Green Book. The idea is that if we can update the Green Book, we can streamline the contracting process so that people have a one-stop shop. They look for everything right there. The Green Book is divided into a significant, I don't even remember the number of divisions, each one looking at a different specific area. The first two divisions of the Green Book deal with administrative and general procurement process. So the procurement regulations that the Board of Estimates adopted a few years ago adopted the current Green Book specs. And it basically said where something didn't conform in the Green Book, the BOE regulations prevailed. This has created conflicts because now you have certain things that are not working together. The idea is we want to align those first two divisions as phase one to align with our current procurement standards and regs and rewrite them. The rest of the divisions are technical. They are like the design, the rise over run of a bridge ramp, that type of stuff. We are going to need to get expert consultants or experts in the, yes, sir, in the, just the general industry and else to help rewrite those so that we have industry best, industry standard specifics. But those first two divisions, we feel comfortable working with the law department that we can update those without the need for extensive consultant support.
And Madam CEO, just want to note that's a priority of this council. You know, we've been talking about procurement since the day we took office. Obviously, the Green Book and many of the kind of the things that our infrastructures went over are a result of like where we are today. So definitely interested in kind of supporting and helping out, particularly as it relates to aggressively going after and proactively just working down the pathway of identifying a bid to maybe bring a consultant in to help us do that. You know, obviously we are far behind where the federal government is, but more importantly where municipalities are that are in comparable size to Baltimore as it relates to procurement. This not only impacts our ability to close out jobs on time and at cost, but also puts particularly our minority and women-owned businesses at a competitive disadvantage. So I know that this is something that the mayor has talked about, the importance of supporting small businesses. I think this is one avenue that the council would definitely love to work and support the administration on, and would definitely love to see kind of a line item in this budget to ensure that we kind of do that. So that's why, you know, was uplifting Unifier as well as the Green Book. And then my last and closeout question, Mr. Infrastructure Czar, I guess, what do you think the resources that will be needed to really try to turn, and this is going to be kind of a leading question, right? So you don't have to answer it, but I'll put it out there, to really turn, I guess, your division into like a true, like centralized project management office. I mean, ultimately, that's where I think the city needs to go. And, you know, ultimately, that's where the council wants to continue to push the administration in that direction. So what do you need as it relates to where you are today and adding additional resources? I brought up PMPs before and Scrum Masters or whatever, but what do you think you need to kind of build that out?
I thank you for that question. That is more or less what the vision of the office was. It was the infrastructure funding being the impetus, but there was a recognition of really getting a strategic citywide project management team. And I've been thinking about this a little bit because right now this is a brand new model, a new paradigm. It is something where we need to work with our agency partners. We have we have agencies, some of which can really deliver complex projects. Others are not necessarily used to delivering these projects. Trying to align that, baseline that, and then seeing where those needs are. Are we really looking at a project like a PMP, you know, type of approach where we have a bunch of PMPs on different projects? Are we looking at more process improvement to get systems aligned? Are we looking at more financial alignment on just resources and then building up a decentralized model where we can funnel things? Okay.
Maybe turn it off.
Okay.
You broke the mic.
I can find some funding for that, I'm sure. Infrastructure does include microphones. So yes, that's the grand idea. Before I break this one, that's the grand idea, is to move it that way and to really figure out how we can align all the resources and to look at what things are a citywide coordinated type approach versus what are things that our agencies are best able to handle that really fits within their bailiwicks. Yes, sir.
Thank you for that. Are there any additional questions? Mr. Chair.
Thank you. As you know, that BG&E is installing these new, I guess, gas lines in front of people's houses. Who's monitored that? I had a gentleman had his installed in January. The contractors kept giving him different information. He did not live in his house for 3 months until I had to intercede in it to get it done. My question is, who is monitoring that, and why is it, because I get a lot of emails, and I'm sure my colleagues, about them installing those gas lines in front of people's houses. Is there a reason why they're in the front and not in the back? Because I get all kinds of emails, and did anybody ever ask BG&E that question?
I am not aware of that answer. I can certainly reach out to DOT or DPW, whoever, because they have to have a right-of-way permit to get in the right-of-way, and they do have an easement. So I could follow up on that, but I don't have an answer for that.
And actually, after they do it, they tear up the cement, and it take them so long to put back the where they tore up. My second question is, who is monitoring the steam in Baltimore? We have all these explosions downtown, and that's not the first one. The other one has been 2 of them. So who in city government is monitoring that? From my understanding, it doesn't look too good like somebody's actually monitoring that, because if you have the same problem that just happened down there, we are so lucky it wasn't nobody walking past there or driving past there. So who is monitoring that part of downtown, or just the steam itself here in Baltimore City?
I can follow up with that as well. I do believe that similar to BG&E, they are independent and they are performing their own work, but they do have to align with us to give permits and right-of-way.
But who from the city is monitoring that BG&E is doing what they need to do to make sure what just happened again don't keep happening? That's my question.
I can definitely follow up on that. And see
So
which
can that be
agency.
a request, please? Thank you. Councilman Burnett? Councilman Cohen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, thank you, Madam CEO and your team. One project I wanted to bring up that sort of fits somewhat within planning, somewhat within DOT, perhaps maybe within the infrastructure shop, is the Greenway Trail. It has felt like this project has been a very long time coming, and it feels like if Baltimore is to be the great American city that we all know it can be, we need to be able to do major projects like this one. The ability to have a trail and a path that goes through our city where folks can walk and bike and move, I think is really important, and it's felt delayed. And it's a complicated project. In my district alone, there's, as Director Ryer knows, there's a part that's owned by Norfolk Southern that the city needs to buy. There is, federal money and state money that has gone in. There's sort of, it's a complicated project, but it's also one that, I think a lot of residents in the city feel like we need to deliver, and we need to deliver on some kind of timeline, and it's felt unclear as to, not that this administration hasn't, every time I've asked questions, Chris and Simone, who I see, have been great, they've gotten back to me, but I just don't get a sense that all the pieces are being connected. I know in some neighborhoods there's been some pushback, there's been some challenges on where the trail would go. Understand all of that, but also know that this is a critically important project for a city that really doesn't have enough green space, doesn't have enough trails. And when we look at cities like Austin in Texas and others that have invested in real trails, it pays huge dividends in terms of improving property values and quality of life and public health and all the rest. And so while I've got the 3 or 4 or however many of you together, I did want to ask sort of where are we going on the Greenway Trails project? Is there an expected timeline? Because it seems to be a moving target. And so if you could both provide sort of an update, and then also just kind of want to just gauge the administration's commitment on this project. Are we all in? Are we doing it? What's going on with it?
I can start, Councilman, with telling you where we are right now.
Great.
So I would say there are really 3 components of this trail. One, where we are now, is to complete the acquisition of the properties needed to build the trail, and planning has taken a lead on that because of its origins in the Green Network Plan. We took an unusual step and allocated capital budgeting dollars to ourselves half a dozen years ago, and we're wrapping up some of those projects, but one of them is the acquisition of the Norfolk Southern site. Once that's complete, it actually goes to 2 different agencies. So it goes to DOT if it's on a right-of-way. It goes to Rec and Park if it's on one of their properties. We haven't gotten to that point yet, and in fact, we have not decided which agency the Norfolk Southern property would go to, for example. So those 2 agencies, though, would then be responsible for design and construction. They would fund it through the CIP process and any other state, what have you, federal process. I will mention we have an earmark to acquire the Norfolk Southern property. The federal earmarks kick in a very regulated process. I don't think I knew this last time I talked to you about how to buy property. Mm-hmm. The assumption appears to be that the federal government is it's trying to protect vulnerable populations. They're not trying to protect railroads. They're trying to protect somebody from using their money to do something untoward. So the number of hurdles are high. I'd say they're in the almost a dozen level, and they're very prescribed. You have to go step by step to acquire property with the federal earmark funds.
Okay. And Madam Administrator, could I just get a sense, sort of the administration's commitment on this project? Again, I think we as a city need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We need to both deliver excellent, effective city services, which I know you are fully focused on, but also be able to do big, innovative, outside-the-box projects that improve the quality of life and health of our residents. And this seems like one where, again, we know there is federal funding, there is an earmark, there is certainly support. Where are we at in terms of kind of pushing through some of the challenges?
Yeah, so I appreciate the question, and what I will say is that while we are committed to the project, we're also committed to doing it in a way that is responsible because it will impact communities. And there has been some concerns raised by some of the communities that will be impacted by the potential direction of the trail, if you will. And so it is, a part of our equitable development practice to consider all of that and to engage communities that will be impacted by major projects like this one. But what I will say is the mayor himself is committed to this project and committed to finding a way to get it done. But again, I think some of the challenges that you've noted, again, we just want to be responsible about how we go about a project like this, given its impact on communities.
Understood, and appreciate the concerns for equity, appreciate the wanting to be participatory in sort of how it, how the trail gets laid down and that it not feel incredibly disruptive for communities. And at the same time, I would just, again, say that, projects like this, there is a world in which we stall out and it just doesn't happen. And I think it would be a great loss for this administration and for this city and for this council if we do not aggressively push forward on the Greenway Trail, knowing just the power that nature has to improve lives, particularly in those communities that have the least access to green space and to walking and to biking. I just think this is a huge opportunity for our city, and would love to see us just work collaboratively, interagency approach to really get this thing done, because I think we owe it to our residents. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the whole team.
Thank you. Matt, is Invista still the system of record for utility work coordination?
That's my understanding. I believe so.
So when outside utility providers fill out their capital projects in there, for example, like BGE, they might be doing a 2-block stretch of a gas main replacement. They would go in the system today and say that they would pick out like 10 square blocks and say the project is going through December 31st of 2024, which is completely useless information. In fact, it causes more brain damage than any good that it could possibly do. Is there a way that either the CAO's office or your office could start to have oversight over that, or provide a directive to DOT to make sure that our utility partners are actually utilizing that system the right way? Thank you. Appreciate it. Colleagues, any other questions?
Mr. Chair, are we going to get the presentation?
There isn't much in the presentation other than a chart outlining the federal dollars. That's why we kind of jump, which we've all seen from our individual briefings with the infrastructure office.
Oh, gotcha.
But
Okay.
if you'd like to see it, there's not even a service for the infrastructure office, as it's all under mayorality related, so.
Okay, then I have questions, because I thought we were going to do the presentation and then ask.
Okay, questions?
Yeah, okay, thank you. I was wondering about, well, first of all, I'm glad that you've been doing individual briefings, because I do have a resolution that I introduced to try to have a hearing about it, which I still want to do. And I'm hoping that that can get scheduled relatively soon, just so that to be, perfectly, clear to the public, what's happening, because we get questions all the time, like, who's in charge of the infrastructure office and what's happening, So can you talk a little bit about, obviously the Infrastructure Act has both like bridge dollars, but it also has flood mitigation dollars. It has, all the other things. And so I guess the question is like, how is the city getting ready to apply for all, like, here's the thing, we don't want to leave any dollar on the table, right? We want to get as much as possible. So there's the capacity of the office, but then there's also the question around the matching funds. And just what's the plan for that? Because a lot of these dollars are going to need a matching funds, which it hasn't been specifically flagged in here that these are, or in the capital budget, that these are matching funds, but I would imagine that some of that can be used. I'll just use 35th and Hillen as an example, right? We have lots of money coming, some money coming in from the capital budget that we can use as a match, right, for some of this stuff. But I'm not sure how that goes with all the other infrastructure projects that we want to do. So just kind of wondering the capacity of the office, again, if you could say it publicly, and then, how we're approaching the match question in this budget.
Certainly. Thank you very much for that question. And it's the infrastructure bill, Inflation Reduction Act, these are two massive bills right on the heels of ARPA. So the city has a tremendous opportunity, which you all know and are very much familiar with. The key is that with the infrastructure money, they usually require, as you said, matches. Generally, the minimum requirement is 20%. Sometimes it gets up to 50, sometimes even a little more. And the key is it's no longer just a local match, it's called a non-federal match, which means that we can use either city funds directly, or we could even work with their state partners, or we can work with the private sector and develop sort of innovative public-private partnerships. All of those things are on the table. We have a new administration in Annapolis who is ready and willing to partner with us. There are opportunities for flexing their funding, perhaps, which the previous administration was not interested in doing in Annapolis. This one seems more willing to do it. They've done it in the past, where they can actually use some funds that the city might not be able to use to give their funding to the city to use in turn. The other thing is actually utilizing, working collaboratively with the state on their contracting capacity. They're able to contract at a different scale and a different volume than we are, and it might make sense for some of those projects to go through the state for design or at least for procurement. The big piece with the funding is there are certain funds that we have to apply for each year. Those are discretionary grant funding. The federal government likes those. They're going more towards them because that gets really top-level, hot items that the president or the secretary of transportation can get behind. But there's still, the bulk of the funding is still in traditional formula dollars, where states get them apportioned each year regardless of whether they apply or not. The city, in this CIP, we programmed $40.4 million. Each year, we are the latest apportionment for federal fiscal year 23, which is it's not the same timetable as 38 million. So we always appropriate a little more, knowing that we're not going to spend all of it by the end of the year, and that we can also move some around. But we're able to seek reimbursement for up to 38 million. They give us a cap of 35 million in case they claw some of that back. The second piece is low-interest financing. So the feds capitalize state revolving funds for our utility in the state that they lend out to DPW at a very low interest rate. It's usually 50% of the market rate. So that has saved us hundreds of millions of dollars of using that to ratepayers. But all of that money has to be repaid, as opposed to the formula dollars and the grant funding. DPW has applied for $253 million of that just for this year. Since fiscal year 2015, they've applied for, I believe it's over $500 million. So it's something that is ongoing. They apply for it each year. It does have to be repaid. And then lastly, the programs that get a lot of the flash are the competitive grant ones. We've been very successful. We've gotten $16.4 million so far as a city. $20 million additionally is pending review by the federal government, and we're looking and currently working on $44 million in additional applications that we were going to be submitting as a city through the end of the year. But again, all of those, we can't submit it unless we've identified matching funds. The big benefit for us starting in this year and growing in the future is going to be the state made changes to the local disbursement of highway user revenue. So that is going to unlock a tremendous amount of opportunity for us to leverage additional funding in that regard. That's starting this year, and it's only going to be growing in the coming years.
Yes, we worked really hard.
Yes, ma'am.
We worked really hard. No, that's good. I'm glad that we invite them. Excuse me. Thank you. We worked hard to get the increased HUR. That's only for the next 4 years, so we're going to have to battle again for that. So we're already starting that process. And then also I'm glad that you've already started to identify like what in this capital budget and this budget can be used, and that we can say that we have matching funds for, because I think that's important. The other piece of what I thought your office was going to do was also with the IRA bill, and that's obviously, there's some grants that we can apply for, but it's mostly like getting the word out to residents that the residents can apply for these kinds of things. What's the plan there to do that?
So a lot of those programs, the infrastructure bill was passed in November 21. That's still actually being rolled out. It's taken over a year. Inflation Reduction Act was passed just this past September, 2022. Right. So a lot of those programs are still being developed. Their first focus was on the healthcare provisions, implementing those, as well as the IRS provisions. A lot of the environmental provisions are now being rolled online. There's one in particular involving trees, street trees, and we are coordinating with the Department of Rec and Parks and some other organizations to really look at submitting an application to get some funding for street tree plantings. But also, we're starting to work with agencies on some of these other areas where they have technical capacity and other opportunities that you can get for private, nonprofits, others. We're working with agencies to help identify those nonprofits that they're working with in communities, and we're also looking at the, other agencies that might have that information. That's just started coming out online, but we're going to be looking to do more of that as we move forward.
Yeah, there's some real opportunities in
Absolutely.
that we should, make sure that residents know about, because it's hard to understand also.
Absolutely.
Right, part of that work that I see your office doing is sort of, what are the opportunities, how do you translate it into English and
Right.
other languages that are in our residents, but I mean like out of government speak and into, ways that people can understand it in Spanish and in other languages.
So we're monitoring all of the feeds from the federal government every day. They come out with new information in the Federal Register, as well as other grants, notices, and all. I have a number of people who are monitoring those every single day, and as soon as we get them, we send them out to agency partners and start convening meetings on that.
No, I appreciate that, and also want to echo my colleagues in their emphasis on the fact that we need to do much better coordination with our agencies. I brought it up earlier about an issue that we're having, again, on Greenmount Avenue, and it's just unacceptable to have, the street ripped up 40 different times. So hopefully we can find a solution to that, because even with the Investa system, we, at least in a couple of instances in my district, BGE did not use it. Okay, and so like that there's got to be some other way to be much more proactive about that as well. I can go into all kinds of details about that situation, but I'll refrain. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Matt, can you give an update on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Bridge on South Hanover Street, which connects Cherry Hill to South Baltimore?
Yes, sir. That is obviously, it's what this opportunity with this bill and all this federal money is doing is letting us think of projects that were almost so big we couldn't even wrap our minds around it. And one of those, the prime one, is the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Bridge. There are a couple of grant opportunities that are specifically geared for large construction projects and large design projects. We are we've started a team working with DOT to look at putting together an application with the planning department as well. It is in the CIP budget for beginning the work on an environmental impact study on that particular bridge. That will start the clock, basically, when we do it. Because once you start that, you only have so long that you can use that and then begin work. So we are hoping to go for a grant application to begin that work under the infra program, which is for mega construction projects. And we're looking to do a design project with that, and it is in the CIP, would be included in this budget.
Great, thank you. If you could please keep us updated on
Absolutely.
that. That's not a formal request.
Yes, sir.
One last item I had, CAO Leach, I added this to the letter that I had sent you. The Central District Police Station, which many of you are familiar, is at the former Baltimore Sun building on Calvert Street, North Calvert Street. In 2019 and again in 2020, the city announced plans to first move BPD's Central District to the former Baltimore Sun building, to be followed by a consolidation of wide variety of BPD and BCFD functions from around the city. This consolidated public safety facility was intended to save the city tens of millions in deferred maintenance of at least 4 other city-owned buildings and improve intra-agency communications by housing these functions in one building. Since Central District relocated, it seems that the project has stalled. If the larger project is no longer moving forward, what are the plans for relocating Central District and OEM from the former Sun building?
Thank you for that question. So this was actually one of the first projects that I took on when I took on my role as city administrator. And I actually pulled our infrastructure czar, Ms. Director Garbark, as well as our DGS director, Attila, into a conversation with all of the partners that are involved. We actually meet bi-weekly on this project. And just about a little over a month ago, I actually met with a TAPCO, the developers of that project, and did a walkthrough of the facility so that we could talk through, just some opportunities there. So we are actively working on this project. What I will say is, and what we've discussed throughout the day, is that there are a number of increasing demands on the city's budget. And so this is going to be a pretty large undertaking, this project as well as the courthouse project, but they're all projects that we need to get done. And so when I talked a little bit earlier about the 10-year financial plan, this will be a part of that modeling that we'll be able to do. But even ahead of that, what we've communicated to the developers and what we have already moved on, and the directors can jump in here, is that we are working with a financial advisor. So we just put out an RFP to bring on a financial advisor that can advise us on how we can make a development project like this work and how we can build the proper capital stack so that we can actually afford this project along with the courthouse project. So we'll get the results from that financial consultant, and we will include that in kind of this 10-year financial plan assessment that we are doing. We are committed to figuring out how to make this project work, as well as the courthouse, but also we are committed to making the hard decisions if we need to make the hard decisions. So we are actively working on this project, and like I said, we meet every other week on it.
Thank you. So what happens if we're not able to move forward? What is the plan for the Central District?
Yep. So I think right now we are moving towards this project, but what we are doing, and our DGS director can talk a little bit more, is we're looking at our inventory to determine if for some reason we are not able to complete this project, what facilities do we have in our inventory that we might be able to use. The other piece of this too, and again, going back to this 10-year financial plan, there are city-owned assets that we potentially could offload and probably should, right, in some cases, right? Some are more valuable than others. And so again, as a part of this long-term financial plan, we are looking at potentially selling assets to generate revenue that could go towards a project like this, right? So the reason why I don't have a more fulsome answer for you either way today is because we need to do this long-range financial planning to figure out how we can afford that project, the courthouse project, deferred maintenance, right? I mean, we have billions of dollars worth of needs when it comes to capital in the city of Baltimore. So to be very specific about your question, we are looking at contingency plans if we're not able, if we're not able to move forward with that project. But what we are trying to do is figure out how we can build that stack so that we can afford to take on the project.
Got it. Are there any looming deadlines?
There are. Yes, and the directors can keep me honest on this. I think we have a lease that expires in January. Yep.
That's correct.
And yes, so our lease for the facility expires in January, so we will have to attempt to renegotiate a new lease. Is there anything else I'm missing on the lease negotiations? I think the developers want to see a commitment from us for this project, and I think that will be an active part of the lease negotiations.
Yes, that's sort of the thing where we are now. We're only using a portion of the building. Developers ultimately want the entire building. We have to figure out what we can do and what those terms would be and how we get there. Key to that is getting this consultant on board, as Administrator Leach said, not to tell us, basically tell us how and what we need to do to get there, because this is going to be very, very complex.
Yep. And sorry, just to offer some additional color here, I think right now we're estimating, or our previous real estate director was estimating, that this project could potentially cost us around $250 million, right? And so again, this 10-year assessment and also the work that DGS does is we now have to see those facilities or those offices that we are moving out of their current space. What savings could we identify from, those agencies moving into this more centralized location? So that is a part of the assessment. Another thing that has come up is the cost around what is in the building. So for example, evidence control. There are significant costs for evidence control to be in that space, for example, right? And again, we don't have to go into the details here, but what we can do with this financial consultant is do some modeling around, like, what if evidence control were not there, right? Like how would we be able to afford the project would the project be more affordable if that were shifted somewhere else, right? So there are a number of moving parts that we are actively working on, and that is why we meet so frequently, is because we do know that we have this looming deadline coming up in January.
Got it. Last piece of this question, this assessment is part of the 10-year financial plan?
No, the financial consultant is just for this project and the courthouse project, because I needed to, and just, again.
Sense of urgency, got it, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, same,
exactly. Yeah.
when do we expect the results from that to be?
We didn't hire someone yet.
The RFP has come back. We have a number of firms. We've already interviewed half of them. We're interviewing the remaining few imminently. We are hoping to move this quickly and have a contract hopefully by midsummer to get them to work immediately at that point.
And when would the work product be back from the consultant?
We would have to work out the timeline, but it would need to be well in advance for us to make a decision.
Of January?
Of January.
And you think that's possible?
It will be tight, but we are all aligned and under the administrator's direction
So
to get it
I'm hearing you
done.
say there's a chance.
We will.
You're saying, yes, sir, there is a chance.
We will work,
yes.
we will work diligently, and if the consultant is at least able to pull all the, the main pieces together so that we can, make the best, most informed decision, that is what we need at this point. And quite frankly, because again, this was one of the first projects that I took on that I just needed to understand the full scope of these two projects, because the courthouse project is also another $700 million potentially. Even though there's a lot of grants and other revenue that can come in, I just need someone who can do the modeling for me and give us, help us make a sound decision. So we are actively working on it.
Got it. I don't want to take up your bandwidth with this, but if the directors could keep me updated maybe on like a monthly basis moving forward, just informally, don't need a meeting, just a phone call or a quick email.
Happy to.
Greatly appreciated. Thank you.
May I-
Councilwoman Porter?
Yes, may I also be included on that, because that's a model for economic modeling for other large-scale projects in the city through this office. So I think it's a great standard operating procedure that you're being developed through the consultant. So I'd like to be included on that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Great. All right, we are now in recess. We will be back promptly at 6 p.m. for Charm TV.